Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lynsey Wilson. Lynsey Wilson was a kind and loving young woman. Lynsey had a deep-seated need for connection and love. Her major misstep was that she misjudged her partner and invested herself in their toxic relationship. Lynsey was 17 when she found out she was pregnant. Growing up in a loving and supportive family, she had never expected to become a mother so young. Although she was emotionally mature. What made it even more difficult was that her boyfriend, whom she had been dating since she was 13, abandoned her as soon as he learned he was going to be a father. His sudden departure left Lynsey feeling both upset and scared. Lynsey was all too familiar with the physical and financial strains of motherhood. Her family, the Wilsons, were loving and close-knit, but they had often struggled to make ends meet. Despite their financial challenges, Lynsey's parents had always worked hard to provide for their children. When Lynsey met Mitchell, 5 months into her pregnancy, she felt like she had been given a rare gift. Mitchell, who was 20 years old at the time, was attentive, caring, and gentle. What impressed Lynsey most was that her pregnancy didn't deter him. Instead, he was eager to be involved and supportive. Mitchell told Lynsey that he had fallen in love with her at first sight and wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, raising her child as his own. To show his commitment, Mitchell began working overtime to ensure that Lynsey and their unborn child would not have to worry about anything. 20-year-old Mitchell was a true gentleman. He was attentive and loving to Lynsey, despite her delicate condition. In fact, Mitchell had fallen deeply in love with her at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her, including raising her child as his own. At the time, Mitchell was earning a good income. However, when they announced their decision to get married, their parents were shocked. They felt that their 5-week relationship was too short to withstand the challenges and circumstances that came with marriage. Despite their concerns, Lynsey relatives noticed a positive change in her since being with Mitchell. She had regained her cheerfulness and good health. However, some of them found Mitchell's behavior to be a bit insincere. Nevertheless, no one interfered with their decision to get married, and instead chose to keep their doubts to themselves. The wedding took place in August 1995, surrounded by a small, intimate group of family and friends, mostly from the bride's side. The groom's side was noticeably underrepresented, with only his parents, a brother, and 2 friends in attendance. Despite the celebratory atmosphere, Lynsey relatives couldn't shake off their uneasy feelings about the union. However, Lynsey herself was over the moon, believing she had found her perfect match. As the evening wore on, their happiness was short-lived. A disagreement erupted, and the newlyweds' argument played out in front of their guests. The reason for Mitchell's outburst seemed trivial, and his reaction was disproportionately intense. The situation escalated, with Mitchell grasping Lynsey's hand and violently shaking her, leaving everyone in attendance stunned and uncomfortable. Mitchell appeared agitated and threatening, causing concern. When he calmed down, he apologized to everyone and made light of the situation, attributing his behavior to holiday stress. Although Lynsey didn't think much of the incident at the time and soon forgot about it, it was actually one of the warning signs of their toxic relationship. After getting married, Mitchell and Lynsey moved into an apartment in Southport, away from their parents. They started their life together and soon welcomed a baby girl named Robin. However, Lynsey soon discovered that her husband had a volatile temper, which cast a shadow over the joy of their new family. Mitchell's moods were unpredictable. One moment he was happy and joking, and the next, he would become aggressive and unreasonable. She thought she was maintaining a delicate balance at home, but in reality, she was giving in to his control. He dictates her every move and gets angry if she misses a phone call or doesn't pick up. Their arguments often ended with Mitchell begging for forgiveness and declaring his love. For a while, it seemed that peace had been restored, but their cycle of arguments became more and more intense. Lynsey struggled to recognize who she once loved. She frequently shared her concerns with her relatives, who urged her to leave the relationship and end her suffering. However, Lynsey found it difficult to acknowledge her mistake and admit defeat. Lynsey's relatives noticed that she often dwelled on memories of the past. Whenever her husband promised to change and return to his gentle and caring ways, Lynsey wanted to believe him and waited for him to fulfill his promises. Meanwhile, Mitchell's controlling behavior intensified. He restricted Lynsey's freedom, forbidding her from going out alone in the evenings and eventually requiring her to be accompanied by him at all times. Despite his possessiveness, Mitchell was seen with other women, sparking Lynsey's suspicions of infidelity. Lynsey confided in her older sister about her concerns, sharing an incident where a woman visited their home, unaware that Mitchell was married. This revelation led to another argument, which escalated into physical violence. Physical abuse gradually became a part of Lynsey's life. To control her and protect his reputation, Mitchell started limiting her interactions with others. He began by restricting her contact with neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, and eventually with her family. Lynsey, unhappy and fearful of being caught and punished, tried to secretly maintain contact with her loved ones. Despite the problems in their relationship, Lynsey stayed with Mitchell. One reason was the comfortable life he provided. He had a good income, supported her and their child, and paid the bills, leaving her without any financial worries. Lynsey's life changed dramatically when she found herself pregnant again. Although her husband, Mitchell, was a good father to her daughter from a previous relationship, she felt that having another child would be unwise in their current circumstances. She decided to have an abortion. When Mitchell found out about her decision, he became furious and verbally and physically abused her. Lynsey packed her belongings and took her daughter to her parents' home. Her family was relieved to see her. At first, Lynsey was happy to be apart from her husband, Mitchell. But over time, she started to miss him. Mitchell, eager to win her back, would call her constantly, begging her to return. Despite initial reservations, Lynsey was eventually won over by Mitchell's claims that he had changed. Everything seems to be back to normal, they are even looking forward to another child. However, their happiness was short-lived. After 6 months, Mitchell's violent temper flared up again. Although he didn't harm Lynsey, who was pregnant at the time, he unleashed his fury on their apartment. He smashed furniture, ripped doors off their hinges, and damaged the walls. He even threw their television out the window and vandalized their car. The landlord, fed up with the destruction, demanded that they pay for the damages and move out. The family's financial situation became even more dire. As a result, they was forced to take out a significant loan and downsize to a smaller, more modest apartment. In October 1997, Lynsey gave birth to their son, Jack. Mitchell was overjoyed at the arrival of his child. However, the relationship between the spouses continued to deteriorate over time. Mitchell often left home for extended periods, sometimes for just a few days, sometimes for an entire week, frequently citing trivial or made-up reasons. Although Lynsey had grown accustomed to her husband's behavior, she eventually reached her breaking point and filed for divorce, returning to her parents' home when Mitchell abandoned her once again. Lynsey realized she couldn't handle the separation from Mitchell on her own, so she reached out to a local charity that supports women in crisis. The charity helped her find affordable housing in a different city, allowing her to start fresh. However, she was worried that Mitchell would find out her new contact information, so she took steps to protect herself. When Mitchell began making threats, she took it a step further and got a restraining order from the police. With the help of a therapist, Lynsey started rebuilding her life. She kept a journal to document her experiences, intending to use it as a warning for her children in the future, so they wouldn't make the same mistakes she did. The journal entries supported what her relatives had said about the problems within the family. Unfortunately, despite her efforts to stay hidden, Mitchell eventually discovered her phone number and began calling her constantly, demanding to see their son. Lynsey, now free, soon felt lonely and couldn't resist her ex's persistence. They started talking and seeing each other again, eventually moving back in together. Ashamed of her weakness, Lynsey kept this a secret, but it eventually came out. Her relatives and friends were shocked and disappointed by her reunion with he they considered a tyrant, and they couldn't understand why she had taken him back. Her relatives continued to dislike Mitchell and cut off most communication with him. Despite their efforts to help her, Lynsey repeatedly returned to the abusive relationship. As a result, her loved ones eventually gave up trying to save her, accepting the situation and distancing themselves. This time, however, Lynsey's decision would prove to have devastating consequences. After Lynsey disclosed her situation, a social worker began monitoring the young family. However, the social worker reported that she had been unable to contact Lynsey for several weeks. Every time she visited the home, Lynsey's husband, Mitchell, would answer the door, and he was also the first to answer any phone calls. Despite the social worker's repeated requests to speak directly with Lynsey, Mitchell would make excuses and prevent her from doing so. The social worker would leave her contact information, but Lynsey never returned her calls. The social worker became concerned for Lynsey's safety and requested a welfare check. When law enforcement responded to the report and visited the address, they too were unable to speak with Lynsey. Mitchell claimed that he had not seen his wife at home for a long time, but he did not consider her missing. Mitchell said that Lynsey participated in a party with a friend on Christmas Eve, returning home early in the morning somewhat intoxicated. This led to an argument with Mitchell. Following the argument, Lynsey packed her belongings and left without saying goodbye to the children. Mitchell claimed Lynsey had left him for another man and no longer wanted to have any contact with him. Mitchell's subsequent media appearances sparked widespread attention. He presented himself as a worried and abandoned husband, pleading for Lynsey to return. However, during these interviews, he also shared intimate details about their marriage, occasionally speaking negatively about his wife. Mitchell believes that Lynsey's actions stemmed from a desire for a lavish lifestyle. He said to have seen her driving an expensive car, which he thought was proof that she had left their children for a wealthy man. Despite her public image, Mitchell was enjoying the freedom of a single life. The search for Lynsey began with conversations with her relatives. During these conversations, it was learned that she was last seen by her family on December 11th. At that time, she appeared to be in high spirits and looking well, with her behavior being normal. During their investigation, detectives were surprised that no one had expressed concern about the young wife's whereabouts for 2 months. However, they soon discovered a plausible explanation. Mitchell had a history of limiting his wife's interactions with others, even close relatives. In the past, her family had difficulty staying in touch with her due to Mitchell's controlling behavior, which made it more believable that Lynsey had intentionally kept a low profile for an extended period. The news of Lynsey's disappearance alarmed everyone, despite the initial assumption that she was not the type to be concerned about. She was known for her modest lifestyle and never drank. Additionally, her husband had restricted her from having any contact with the outside world, including friends and acquaintances. Several inconsistencies in Mitchell's statement to the police raised suspicions about his character. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell would willingly let his wife leave, and that Lynsey would not abandon her children to a controlling husband. To clarify the situation, the police conducted a thorough investigation, interviewing all of Lynsey's acquaintances and searching for anyone who may have seen her after the family gathering. They also questioned their neighbors and obtained surveillance footage from the residential complex and surrounding areas. Lynsey's disappearance was not immediately noticed, and by the time it was. However, investigators later discovered that she was last seen in person on December 15th at the local post office, where she sent several letters and postcards. Her older sister confirmed that they met that day, despite Mitchell's disapproval. During their brief conversation over tea, Lynsey handed her sister a note and asked her to read it later. Unfortunately, the sister forgot about the note in her purse and was unable to find it later, leaving its contents a mystery. As the months passed, investigators grew increasingly suspicious that she was no longer alive, given her prolonged absence and lack of contact. Although they couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient evidence, their suspicions about him intensified as they learned more about their history and relationship. Lynsey's parents and detectives suspected Mitchell was involved in her disappearance, but lacked concrete evidence. Searches at their home and nearby turned up nothing. In a televised interview, Mitchell denied any wrongdoing, even claiming Lynsey's family would eventually apologize for suspecting him. Just before the holidays, Mitchell sent a postcard and hair dye to the lead investigator. The postcard's sarcastic message mocked the detective, implying he needed confidence and to cover his gray hair. This gesture showcased Mitchell's arrogance, despite portraying himself as a victim in the media. The investigation team held an interview to clarify some aspects of the case, but they didn't reveal all the details. They suggested that Mitchell Key, a well-known family man, was not what he seemed to be. In 2000, Mitchell Key found himself at the center of a scandal when it was discovered that he had been forging his wife's signature to claim social benefits. Although this revelation indirectly supported the theory that he was involved in Lynsey's disappearance, the investigators had trouble making progress due to Mitchell's popularity. Many people defended him, arguing that as a single father, he needed financial assistance. Despite this, the detectives were able to charge him with fraud. Mitchell was found guilty and sentenced to a month of community service. Mitchell's situation took a turn for the worse. The forged signature of his missing wife raised more than a few eyebrows, and the public's outrage grew. As the criticism mounted, Mitchell's composure began to fray, and he lashed out at the media for invading his personal life. In a groundbreaking development, a visitor to an amusement park on June 1, 2000, stumbled upon a disturbing discovery that rekindled the Lynsey disappearance case. Their dog's strange behavior near the roller coaster led to the discovery of human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains belonged to Lynsey, revealing she had been the victim of a violent crime. This breakthrough shifted the investigation's focus to finding the person responsible. On June 7, Mitchell was questioned by detectives for over 36 hours, during which time he eventually cracked under the pressure and confessed to murdering and dismembering his wife. According to his testimony, Lynsey had asked for a divorce on December 15, 1998, after meeting with her sister. This request enraged Mitchell, causing him to attack and strangle her in front of their children. He then hid her body in their bedroom, taking steps to conceal the smell. Realizing he needed help to dispose of the body, Mitchell turned to his brother Elliot, a butcher, for assistance. Although Elliot was initially hesitant, Mitchell eventually convinced him to help. While their children played in the next room, the brothers dismembered Lynsey's body and later scattered her remains throughout the city. The murderer showed no remorse or empathy during his confession. Instead, he seemed to take pride in his actions, saying that without his confession, they would never have been able to prove his guilt. He then led the authorities to the locations where he had hidden the victim's body parts. Unfortunately, her head and one hand were never found. The forensic examination confirmed that all of those of Lynsey, leaving no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The trial of the Mitchell brothers took place in January 2001 and was a relatively straightforward process. Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 17 years. A court-appointed psychiatrist observed that Mitchell displayed classic characteristics of a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. Elliot, Mitchell's brother, was sentenced to 7 years in prison for his role in covering up the crime. Lynsey's children were taken care of by her grandparents, who gave them their last name. 3 months after the sentence, the Wilson family faced another tragedy when one of Lynsey's older brothers, unable to cope with the loss, took his own life in the family's attic. In his goodbye note, he expressed his desire to reunite with Lynsey, saying he saw no point in living in a world he considered cruel. As of 2017, Mitchell Key, Lynsey's murderer, became eligible for parole, but as of January 2023, his parole requests have been denied 3 times. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Vera Pekteleva. Vera Pekteleva was born on September 24, 1997 in Kelos, Kovo Oblast. As she grew up, she became a cheerful and creative individual. With a passion for singing, she secured first place in various school competitions. Although her parents, Oksana and Yvonne, divorced during her school years, they remained on good terms. Vera maintained a positive relationship with both her father's new wife and her mother's new husband. Those who knew her described Vera as a kind, optimistic, and non-confrontational person. As mentioned earlier, Vera was a creative individual, and her family was taken aback when, after completing high school, she opted to move to Kovo and pursue a technical education at the state university, rather than following a more artistic route. Her mother, Oksana, resided in Kisilov, which was approximately 110 miles away from Kovo, and Vera would visit her during her spare time. During one of her visits in 2016, Vera encountered Vladislav Kanyus, a young man of her age. Unlike Vera, Vlad, as he was commonly known, was a complete contrast. He did not have life goals, was introverted, and had a quick temper. Having dropped out of school after the 9th grade, Vlad grew up in a troubled home. After his mother abandoned the family, he was left to live with his father. Unfortunately, his life was filled with more challenges. His father had frequent run-ins with the law, which ultimately culminated in him taking his own life in front of Vlad, leaving an indelible mark on him. Vera fell in love with Vlad despite having little in common with him. However, her parents were against their relationship, knowing Vlad's troubled past. Vera's father discovered her relationship with Vlad, and he asked her to end it. Instead of breaking up with Vlad, Vera just stopped discussing him with her parents. Vlad was never present at family gatherings, and his pictures were not posted on Vera's social media. It seemed as though Vera was keeping him a secret, according to Oksana, Vera's mother. One important detail is worth noting. In 2019, Vera and Vlad began cohabiting in Kovo. Vera's parents financially assisted with the apartment, and Vlad, who was unemployed by choice, thoroughly enjoyed living with Vera, who was not only beautiful and intelligent, but also financially secure. She consistently had money and supported him. However, their relationship was strained. Vlad struggled with alcohol addiction and showed no inclination to seek help or change his behavior. Her parents were convinced that Vlad was abusive to her. After years of suffering, Vera made the brave decision to end the toxic relationship in November 2019. However, Vlad refused to accept this and disputed her choice. As her parents had financially supported the couple's apartment, Vera reasonably expected Vlad to vacate the premises. But Vlad was unwilling to give up the benefits of living off someone else's generosity. Now here's an excerpt from Vlad's testimony. It will give you a more accurate idea of what happened after Vera decided to end her relationship with him. But remember, this is Vlad's testimony, so it's up to you whether you believe his words. On December 15, 2019, a fight broke out between him and Vera over his desire to visit a nightclub, which she opposed. This was not their first disagreement. Throughout their relationship, Vera had been frequently visiting Selos and drifting away from him. She even confessed to speaking with another person. In fact, she had ended her relationship with Vlad a month prior. He later discovered from a mutual friend that she was involved with Alexander, a resident of Selos. Although he had never met Alexander, when he confronted Vera, she acknowledged the relationship. At the time, they continued to cohabitate, But following their December 15 altercation, she left, taking some belongings with her. Despite their separation, they remained in contact by phone, and on January 12, 2020, he offered to assist her in relocating her remaining belongings to a new apartment. She agreed to meet him, and they scheduled a time for January 13th. They met in the afternoon, packed up both her belongings and his, since he too wanted to move out, and drank beer, liqueur, and vodka. They got drunk, but there was no conflict until he brought up the topic of their relationship and revealed that he knew about Alexander. She became enraged, swearing at him, insulting him, and starting to physically assault him, kicking him at least 5 times in the groin area and slapping him in the face at least 8 times. He only felt pain from the kicks, not the slaps. Vera instigated the physical fight, which made him angry because she had lied about not seeing another guy and was upset that he knew about her personal life. That was the testimony that Vlad told the police. Next, we'll discuss the other side of this story, which gives every reason to believe that Vlad was not honest in his testimony. Vera sent a voice message to her friend at 5:08 p.m. In the message, she mentioned that she was already at the apartment, packing her belongings. She expected to be settled into her new apartment around 6 p.m. and requested her friend's help to move her things from the taxi to the apartment. Just 3 minutes later, Vera sent a new voice message. She invited her friend to come to the apartment where she lived with Vlad and help her with the move. However, Vera did not have time to finish as Vlad intervened by saying, "No one's coming in here." So he was against Vera's friend coming to the apartment. It seems that the situation began to get out of control because 4 minutes later, at 5:15 p.m., Vera, in a low voice, asked her friend to come. It looks like this message was a call for help. She deliberately spoke in a low voice so that Vlad wouldn't hear her. At 5:25 p.m., Vera sends another voice message, and Vlad's dominant voice is heard again. He tells Vera's friend not to bother them and to wait for Vera to text her. At 7:19 p.m., Vlad recorded the voice message himself. From that moment on, Vera did not have access to her phone. She was left alone with the monster. But what happened next needs to be explained. At about 3 a.m., the neighbors from the same floor started waking up from the terrible screams coming from apartment 738. A witness called what was happening a massacre. The screams were so loud that 15 people gathered in the hallway near the apartment. Vlad's brother was among them, and he remembered Vlad's words and realized they needed to break down the door, since his brother had previously said that he would take Vera's life. The door to the apartment was made of iron, so the neighbors started looking for tools to force it open. All this time, Vera's heart-rending cries were coming from the apartment. People called the emergency service, and these calls eventually became part of a separate investigation. For 30 minutes, the police still weren't at the scene. It lasted until 6:30 a.m. During these 3.5 hours, people called the police, but no one came to Vera's aid. The witnesses made 7 calls to the emergency service while Vera was fighting for her life, but no one came. The last words they heard from behind the door were Vlad's. He said, "Vera, forgive me. I love you very much." In the end, the neighbors found a crowbar in a nearby parking lot and broke down the door. By this time, Vera was already dead, and Vlad was in the bathroom. He was very drunk. While Vera was painfully dying at the hands of her former boyfriend, and the neighbors were trying in vain to get help from the police, the 112 operators were talking about life, laughing, drinking tea, and were very unhappy that they were being disturbed. The police arrived only after it became known that Vera had died. Later, they will claim that there was no gas in one car and that there were no available officers as everyone was busy with other calls. As a result, the 112 operators and the police officers on duty that night were on trial too. The video from the police station was published during the investigation, but there is no point in translating it into English. I can describe it in just one word: indifference. And it is clear even without subtitles. But Vlad claimed there were no conflicts between him and Vera until 5 a.m. However, the forensic examination showed that he lied. Vera received her first injury 6 hours before her death, that is, at about midnight. It meant that Vlad Kanyus was beating and injuring her for 6 hours until she took her last breath. Her body bore around 100 injuries, including stab wounds, a broken nose, and broken ribs. Strangulation marks were also visible on her neck. If the police's inaction shocked you, then be prepared for what comes next, which will be just as astonishing. More than 1,000 people gathered for Vera Pectaleba's funeral. The church could not accommodate everyone. According to Oksana, Vera's mother, the funeral home spent 4 hours trying to restore Vera's face with makeup, but she still could not recognize her daughter. That's how serious her injuries were. Meanwhile, Vlad Kanyus was telling the investigators his version of what happened. He of course tried to downplay his role in this crime. He said about that night that when he started talking to her about our relationship, he suggested they should get back together and told her that he knew she was seeing another guy. A conflict between them started. She didn't like it. After that, she started swearing, insulting him, and hitting him. Namely, she kicked him at least 5 times in the groin area and hit him in the face at least 8 times with her palm. He didn't feel any pain when she slapped him. However, when she kicked him between the legs, he experienced physical pain. That is, Vera started hitting him first. It made him angry. He was angry that she lied and said she wasn't dating another guy. At the same time, Vera said that he was prying into her personal life because he knew everything about her. During this time, she continued to insult him, and he got angry and hit her several times with his palms, about 4 times on the head, but the blows were of small force. When he hit Vera, she fell to the floor, hitting the closet. She was lying on her stomach. She also hit him back, namely, she beat his head with her palms and fists. It was painful. He asked her to stop, but she didn't stop. He remembered she scratched his back. Then he decided to take her by the neck. He saw an iron that was on the floor. He took this iron and wrapped the iron cord around Vera's neck. After that, he tightened the cord around her neck slightly. He squeezed her neck for 1.5 or 2 minutes. At that moment, he didn't realize that he could kill Vera with his actions. He didn't want to kill Vera. He was tightening the cord around Vera's neck because he wanted to scare her. He wanted her to lose consciousness. He wanted her to fall asleep for 15 minutes. After he removed the cord from her neck, she started making sounds, coughing or wheezing. When he removed the cord from Vera's neck, she was in a prone position, but then he put her on her back. At that moment, she was unconscious. At the same time, she made sounds, that is, wheezed. He thought she was fine. After a while, he started waking Vera up, but she was unresponsive. Then, he started listening to whether her heart was beating. He put his ear to her mouth, then to her heart. She had no pulse, she wasn't breathing. He don't remember what happened next. He remembered that at some point, he ended up in the bathroom. At the same time, he had a knife in his hands. He took a knife with me because he wanted to hurt myself. He didn't want to live because he realized that Vera was dead. He didn't want to kill her. After some time, the door to the apartment opened, and his brother and a police officer were inside. After that, he was told to get dressed. He was taken to the police station. He's sorry for what he did. He do not deny that it was his actions that caused Vera's death. He didn't want to kill her. He wanted to apologize to Vera's family. As you have noticed, Vlad has a selective memory. He remembered strangling Vera, but did not remember how he inflicted about 100 injuries on her. It was also unclear how Vera could have punched him in the face and scratched his back while she was lying on her stomach on the floor. During the interrogation, it also became clear how Vlad's brother ended up at the crime scene. After all, he lived in another city. Here's what Vlad told the police about it. He called his brother. He told him about what happened. He told him that Vera wasn't breathing, and his brother told me to call an ambulance and give her CPR. He tried to give her first aid. He tried to give her CPR and cardiac massage, During the investigation, it became known that he called his brother at about midnight and said that he was going to take Vera's life. At the second interrogation, when asked again about the injuries on Vera's body, he replied, "It was probably me who caused those injuries to Vera." He did not count the number of his blows, but these injuries that were found on Vera's body by the expert may have been caused by me. He don't remember how many times he hit her, but he think it's the same number as indicated by the expert. He admit he caused her all the injuries indicated in the report. He wanted silence. He didn't think about her suffering. She screamed and insulted him during their conflict. He didn't enjoy hitting her, but he didn't like her screaming. He wanted her to shut up. He didn't think about her suffering at that time. Vlad Kanyus also said he had consensual intimate relations with Vera that evening. The related charges were eventually dropped. It was difficult to prove the opposite. Police officers and emergency service operators were charged with negligence. It's hard to believe, but they were not suspended from work during the investigation and continued to provide ridiculous justifications. The prosecutor demanded real prison terms for all 5 defendants, but the judge decided otherwise. They received suspended sentences ranging from 1.5 to 2 years. The court also ordered each defendant to pay around $350 to the victims. Simultaneously, the police department had to pay approximately $111,000. The amounts have been converted from the Russian ruble to US dollars for easier understanding. The indictment states that the police officers had access to gasoline and should have taken appropriate measures to resolve the situation, but they did not consider it an urgent task. Both police officers refused to cooperate with the investigation and did not admit guilt. They claimed that when witnesses reported the woman's screams and cries for help, the investigation team was at another address where a man's corpse had been found. We may never know the full truth of what happened that night. Vera was not planning to stay in the apartment and had asked her friend for help with moving, suggesting that Vlad Kanyus may have forced her to consume alcohol when she was unconscious, then fabricated a story to make the event seem unintentional. In the summer of 2022, the court sentenced Vlad Kanyus to 17 years in prison, and he partially admitted his guilt. He was also ordered to pay around $45,000 in compensation. However, this verdict shocked Vera's parents, who planned to appeal, believing the punishment was too lenient. Surprisingly, Vlad Kanyus did not even serve a full year in prison. In November 2023, photos of him in military uniform appeared online, and in April 2023, it became known that he had received a presidential pardon after 6 months of participation in the ongoing armed conflict in Russia. He was also relieved of the obligation to pay any compensation to Vera's parents. Vera's case has caused widespread resonance in Russia, and the news about Vlad Kanyus's pardon has been equally controversial. The press secretary of the Russian president stated that there are specific procedures for granting pardons, including a confession of guilt by the convict and the possibility of redeeming oneself on the battlefield. No remorse or pangs of conscience. He spoke differently and coldly about his murder, did not apologize, and did not explain the motive for his terrible act. The court sentenced the murderer to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family members, although they considered such a sentence rather mild, noted that they forgive Rudolph because they do not want their hearts to boil with hatred. Her parents and sisters are now responsible for the upbringing of Elizabeth woman's children. Even though Elizabeth is no longer here, everyone in her family and community will always remember her. She was a lovely, lovely mother. I want to say a lovely daughter too. She was basically my daughter. She had the ultimate respect for me, as I did for her, said her stepfather Fidel Galvan in 2016. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Carol Carroll. Carol Carroll, a young mother and actress in the adult film industry, is a stark example of the perils that pursuing fame and money in this field can bring. She did not consider her work immoral. Her goal was to achieve financial independence and eventually retire once she had saved enough to support herself and her young son. Tragically, however, she was never able to leave the industry, and who once admired by thousands of fans was eventually discovered dismembered on a rocky cliff beside a road. Carol was born on September 19, 1995, in a small Italian province. She was the only child of her parents, Fabio and Josephine, who had Italian maternal roots and Dutch paternal heritage. When she was just 4 years old, her parents decided to divorce, and she stayed with her mother. Subsequently, her father moved back to his homeland, the Netherlands, remarried, and had more children. Josephine chose to remain in Italy, raising her daughter alone, as her former husband offered little support. They lived in a small community called Cesto Kenda. Carol's mother worked multiple jobs simultaneously to provide her daughter with everything necessary: a good education and the opportunity for a better life. Carol grew up to be a beautiful, kind, and sociable girl with many friends and an easy rapport with others. As a schoolgirl, she actively participated in sports, particularly horseback riding, and regularly attended a dance studio. Carol was fluent in 3 languages, loved traveling across Europe, read extensively, and could engage in conversation on almost any subject. As a teenager, she blossomed into a true beauty with a slim, feminine figure, already attracting many admirers and suitors. She reveled in being the center of attention. After finishing school, she enrolled in a technical university to study industrial design, arts, and fashion, where she soon became one of the top students in her class. An unexpected pregnancy during her freshman year led Carol to develop a romantic relationship with a young man a year her senior, who was studying at the Faculty of Architecture and Design. In the fall of 2020, when Carol was 20 years old, she discovered she was pregnant. This news came as a complete surprise to both her and the child's father, as they were both students and utterly unprepared for such a development. Nevertheless, Carol firmly decided to keep the baby. In 2016, the young couple had a son together, and their lives changed drastically. Both had to leave school because they lacked the funds to support themselves and their newborn. The new parents decided to move to Verona, where there were more opportunities to earn a living and provide for their family. Carol got a job as a sales consultant in a large cosmetics and perfume retail chain shortly after her son turned 1, while her boyfriend worked on various projects from home, also taking care of their son. In the middle of 2019, Carol unexpectedly fell for another man named Angelo, with whom she began a passionate affair. The couple secretly met for about 6 months, renting hotel rooms, messaging each other at night, and striving to spend every free moment together. However, just before the new year, the father of Carol's child found out about her relationship and decided to part ways with his unfaithful partner. Carol felt this was for the best since she was planning to leave for her new boyfriend anyway, but then a problem arose. Angelo lived in his parents' house, and Carol couldn't move there with her child from a previous relationship. Therefore, they decided to rent a place together. But at that time, the coronavirus pandemic swept the world, leaving the young couple jobless and unable to afford their own apartment. Carol eventually moved into the home of her new boyfriend's parents and decided to temporarily leave her 4-year-old son with his biological father until the situation stabilized and she could bring him to live with her. Meanwhile, the situation worsened. A widespread self-isolation regime was declared, everyone was confined to their homes, and Carol faced significant financial difficulties. During this challenging period, Angelo and his parents supported Carol as best they could. She effectively lived at their expense in their home, unable to contribute financially to her young son. Moreover, Carol's mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which was progressing, and the woman needed costly therapy. Unexpectedly during the lockdown, Carol frantically considered ways to earn money from home to support her son and ill mother. She decided to try earning through social networks and her own YouTube channel, sharing about life in isolation and the challenges she faced. However, this content did not attract much interest. but her attractive appearance as a novice blogger drew attention, earning her compliments and even some inappropriate proposals in the comments. A subscriber suggested she create an account on the platform OnlyFans, noting that her attractive looks would be highly appreciated there, and she could become a star and earn quickly. Carol took this advice and registered on the service under the pseudonym Charlotte Angel. She began creating revealing content, posting her intimate photos and short videos. Quickly, she amassed a significant following willing to pay for such content. Carol soon began earning well, but kept from her boyfriend and close relatives how she was making money and what she was being paid for. Over time, her content became more explicit and sophisticated as she strove to please her fans, and she herself enjoyed this line of work. Carol hid the details of her job as long as she could, but about 6 months later, someone she knew stumbled upon her account. Rumors spread, and soon everyone knew how she was making a living. She wasn't too upset and even tried to justify it by claiming that her work was also a form of art that brought in a decent income and fully satisfied her. However, the conservative Italians were not ready to accept this, so friends and close ones gradually turned away from Carol, believing she was engaged in something immoral, and associating with her might tarnish their reputations. Carol herself regarded this attitude towards her work as prejudice and was confident that she would achieve success, becoming a wealthy and famous adult film star. Soon, the beauty became so popular that adult film studios took serious interest. Several directors approached the sultry Italian with offers to star in their films, and she readily agreed. She participated in group shoots and public performances. Word of her activities quickly reached Angelo, who naively thought his girlfriend was working remotely as a designer, but sometimes went to the office. He was shocked and at a loss for what to do next, as he hadn't planned on breaking up with her. However, when his parents learned about the situation, they insisted he break up with this fallen woman immediately, lest she disgrace their entire family. By then, Carol had enough money to rent her own place. Her OnlyFans account was extremely popular. She regularly received offers from directors, and her fees kept increasing. In interviews, she claimed she didn't plan to do this all her life and intended to eventually finish her education and try her hand as a designer or modeler. But for now, she truly enjoyed what she was doing and was well compensated for it. Nonetheless, Carol often spoke about the constant moral pressure from those around her, their judgments, and attempts to shame her, causing certain psychological traumas. She called her work art and advocated for every woman's right to choose her profession without fear of judgment. Attempting to move on, and with a new dominant lover at 25, Carol moved to a small town called Rescaldina in the Milan province, deciding to start over. She planned to leave her career in the adult industry behind and got a job as a sales consultant at a perfume boutique. It seemed she had completely changed her life, but this was only temporary. A few months later, she met a 42-year-old local banker named David Fontana, who was passionate about photography, specializing in nude photography. They met online where he was seeking a model for his explicit projects. Carol responded to his offer, and during their first meeting, the pair felt an immediate mutual attraction. Fontana had been married for many years, but this did not stop him from starting a relationship with the young woman. They began dating, organizing explicit photographic sessions that regularly led to intimacy. Soon, he learned about Carol's past activities and persuaded her to return to filmmaking, recognizing her true talent. David had mixed feelings for her. He loved her, wanted to possess her, but also liked seeing his young lover in adult films. In March 2021, the banker divorced his wife and started living with Carol, realizing their most explicit and sinful fantasies. He helped her create content that was incredibly popular on OnlyFans, but he took a cut of the profits from their joint work. Carol soon became so successful and popular that foreign directors and studios began offering her lucrative contracts for shoots. Fontana was quite jealous in life, reacting sharply when others paid attention to his girlfriend on the street or tried flirting with her. But there were no restrictions or limits when it came to filming. He treated it as a regular job, which the actress was completely comfortable with. A few months later, Angelo called her, confessing he missed her greatly. He proposed they get back together, noting he was ready to accept her line of work and wouldn't interfere or restrict her. Carol was touched, but admitted she already had another man. Nevertheless, they continued to communicate, but when David learned about this, he became enraged, threatened Angelo, and even set his car on fire. Angelo immediately reported to the police about the threats to his life and property damage. The authorities issued a restraining order preventing Fontana from approaching Angelo, but no evidence of the banker's involvement in the arson was found, so he did not compensate for the damage. The in-demand actress often flew overseas for shoots, and her subscribers numbered over 30,000. Carol was saving up to buy her own home, take her son with her, and planned to leave the adult film industry, find another job, and focus on raising her son. Meanwhile, she began making custom videos, which proved to be a lucrative business. Fans sent her their own scripts of what they wanted to see, and she brought their fantasies to life for a handsome fee. Fontana continued to help her with filming and editing. They still lived together and shared the profits. In September 2021, Carol met an actor named Salvatore Galdo on a film set, who was her partner in several explicit films. However, real feelings ignited between them, and they started a romantic relationship. They dated secretly, fearing what David might do to her new lover. She waited for the right moment to tell the banker everything and break up with him for good. A few months later, Galdo gave her an engagement ring, asking her to become his lawful wife, and she joyfully accepted. By the end of the year, Carol had saved enough money to buy her own home. She planned to take her son, marry Salvatore, and finally decided to talk to Fontana. The man took the news surprisingly calmly. It seemed he understood everything and was ready to let her go to her new lover, but they still had several unfinished projects for which they had already been paid. They agreed to complete the work and then peacefully part ways forever. The mysterious disappearance of Carol. At the beginning of 2022, Carol unexpectedly vanished. She stopped appearing in films, ceased online streams, didn't communicate with colleagues, and accepted no new offers from directors. Many knew she had planned to leave the industry, so they assumed she had done just that. However, even her friends and fiancé, who were very concerned, couldn't reach her. Carol didn't answer calls but responded to messages in messengers, claiming she was fine, had decided to radically change her life, and needed time for herself. To her fiancé, Salvatore, she wrote that she had contracted COVID-19, was self-isolating, and they couldn't see each other for a while. Apparently, this explanation satisfied him, as he did not raise the alarm either. A month or 3 months later, on social media, new posts occasionally appeared on her account, but she hardly interacted with anyone, limiting herself to terse and brief responses, according to the latest photos on Carol's page. She had gone on a seaside vacation without telling anyone. Parts of an unidentified body in bags were discovered on March 20th, 2022. A passerby was walking along the outskirts of the Italian community of Borno on a road along a rocky cliff. He was suddenly drawn to large black trash bags lying on the slope near a body of water. The area was scenic and deserted, so the man was annoyed that someone had decided to dump trash there. He went down to the nearest bag and tried to lift it, but it was quite heavy. The real horror struck him when he saw human fingers poking through the torn polyethylene. The man immediately reported his gruesome discovery to the police, and the responding officers found 4 bags containing a human body divided into 18 parts. The remains were so disfigured that identification seemed impossible. Forensic experts determined it was a young woman who had died at least 2 months earlier, but they could not establish the cause of death. The body had been in a freezer before someone dumped it off the cliff. Presumably, the criminal drove here, simply throwing the bags down, hoping that in such a secluded place, they would remain undiscovered for a long time. The bags tore on impact, causing some of the contents to spill out. Clearly, The criminal had done everything possible to keep the remains unidentified for as long as possible by removing all distinctive features. Pieces of skin were cut off in areas likely covered by tattoos. However, parts of these tattoos remained but were severely damaged. The skin in those areas had been burned with hot objects, cut, and doused with acid. Nevertheless, by piecing together bits of the tattoos and comparing them with a database of missing persons, the police concluded that no one was looking for a woman with such features. This was odd, leading to the speculation that the deceased was not local. This remained the belief until a news report about the body was broadcasted, asking anyone who might recognize the described features to come forward. Soon after, a woman who appeared in adult films came to the station and said that based on the description of the tattoos, she recognized her colleague who had disappeared in early January. The actress mentioned that the deceased worked under the pseudonym Charlotte, but she did not know her real name. This information proved crucial as law enforcement now knew what the girl looked like in life, and they quickly established her identity and real name. The peculiar fiancé. As soon as the deceased's name became known, it was revealed that she had gotten engaged to her colleague, Salvatore Galdo, shortly before her disappearance. Curiously, he had not reported his fiancée missing. This led to the first suspect being found and detained. However, the man was clearly upset by the news of his beloved's demise and puzzled as to why he himself was under suspicion. According to Salvatore, he had kept in touch with the woman through messengers and social media, providing their correspondence as proof. Thus, he had no idea that Carol had long been deceased. He claimed that his beloved had contracted COVID-19 earlier in the year and was self-isolating, which is why he hadn't visited her. When police asked why he hadn't called her to check if she needed help, he said he had spoken by phone with Fontana, who was nearby and had promised to look after the woman. The fiancé's story was disjointed and unconvincing, but his testimony brought a second suspect into the case who needed to be detained and interrogated. However, there was no need to search for David, as he himself turned up at the station the next day to report a person missing. The horrifying truth: Fontana obviously did not expect the body to be found so quickly, so he hadn't been following the news. When he learned that Carol had been found and identified, he became alarmed but still believed the detectives would not track him down. However, when the police arrested Salvatore, the man realized this person would lead law enforcement right to him, as they had communicated by phone, and he had concocted a story about COVID-19, promising to take care of his fiancée. David was visibly nervous, consistently contradicting his own statements, and the story he told was highly implausible. According to him, he and Carol had been very close, but they hadn't seen each other for several months, and she had stopped making contact. He couldn't explain why he had only contacted the police now, under pressure. Fontana eventually began to testify, confessing that he had accidentally ended Carol's life. He claimed that in early January, they were filming extreme content for a client who had paid a large sum. The script required David to bind the woman, tape her mouth shut, put a bag over her head, and then brutally beat, torture, and torment her using various tools, including a hammer. They had agreed that he would not hit her with full force, but she would act as if she were in severe pain. However, during the process, he supposedly went too far, misjudged a hammer blow, and fractured her skull. When he removed the bag from her head, he saw she was in death throes, but instead of calling for medical help or trying to assist her, he, out of mercy, decided to end her suffering with a final hammer blow. Then, the criminal, allegedly in a panic, dismembered the body, but unsure what to do next, simply stored the remains in his freezer for over 2 months before deciding to dispose of them. Reconstructing the actual events, the investigation revealed that the mysterious, perverse client was David himself, who had contacted the woman using a fake account. Evidently, he didn't want to let her go and devised a sophisticated plan of revenge because she had decided to leave him. Additionally, during the torture session, the man extracted the password to her phone, which supposedly was also part of the script and a client's whim. On January 11th, around 9 in the evening, Fontana ended the woman's life by fatally striking her with a hammer. The next day, he purchased a large freezer using the deceased's credit card, as well as a saw and an axe from a hardware store, which he used to dismember the body. He made every effort to disfigure the body to prevent identification. He removed the tattoos along with the skin, and what remained of them he tried to burn, shred, and literally erase. After that, David placed the body parts in bags and stored them in the freezer, where they remained for over 2 months. During this time, the criminal communicated with the victim's relatives and friends on her behalf, and also managed her social media, creating the illusion that Carol was alive. By the end of March, the criminal apparently thought the danger had passed and decided to dispose of the body by dumping it off a cliff in a deserted area. He hoped that the remains would either never be found or, by the time they would have decomposed to the point of being unidentifiable. However, David was mistaken, and the body was discovered just 2 days later, with authorities tracking him down within a week. Trial and verdict. The most bewildering and incomprehensible aspect of this case was that nearly 3 months after the girl's disappearance, none of her relatives or friends had reported her missing. They were all satisfied with the responses in messengers and posts on social media. Even the fiancé, who thought Carol was ill, was not alarmed by the fact that she didn't answer calls and never tried to visit her. If someone had raised the alarm, the murderer would have been tracked immediately via the signal from the victim's phone, which had been on and in David's possession all this time. At the trial, Fontana expressed remorse and swore that he loved Molly and had taken her life unintentionally. He also claimed that he had planned to end his own life after her death, unable to cope with the grief. Naturally, such a statement sounded foolish, and nobody believed him. But the defense insisted that the incident was indeed an unintentional act of violence, despite the fact that the defendant himself had commissioned the recording of the brutal video. On June 12, 2023, the court found Fontana guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay compensation to the deceased's son in the amount of €200,000, as well as €100,000 to Carol's mother and €50,000 to the father of her child. Surprisingly, the manner of assassinating was not deemed cruel, and the dismemberment of the body was not considered an aggravating factor, so the criminal could potentially be eligible for parole. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jasmine Kaur. Jasmine Kaur was born on September 14, 1999 in India. She became the first child of a woman named Rashal Kaur. It's important to note that the word Kaur translates to princess, often used as a second name. However, in today's narrative, it was her surname. After Jasmine, Rashal had twin sons, German and Suku. The children's father passed away when Jasmine was just 6 years old, and the family struggled to cope with this loss. In 2017, at the age of 18, Jasmine decided to embark on a journey to Australia in search of new opportunities. Knowing that her relatives lived there, her uncle residing in Adelaide with his wife and daughter warmly welcomed her. Jasmine moved in with them. Driven by her interest in medicine and the desire to help others, Jasmine aimed to enter the University of South Australia. After passing exams, she enrolled in a nursing program, hoping to contribute to the family that took her in. Jasmine also took on the responsibility of preparing meals for them, showcasing remarkable culinary skills. But that wasn't Tariq Jodal. Her aunt and cousin admired her fashion sense. Jasmine, with her talent for makeup and fashion knowledge, willingly shared her expertise. Despite her young age, she proved to be a reliable, responsible, and conscientious young woman. The excellent upbringing and education provided by her parents complemented Jasmine's compassionate nature, making her an exemplary figure to those around her. Attached to her mother, she deeply missed her and regularly communicated with her and other close relatives, sharing details of her daily life. To gain practical experience before completing her medical studies, Jasmine took a job at a nursing home in the suburbs of Adelaide. It's believed that fate brought her together with Tarakjot Singh. Tarakjot Singh, born in 1999 in a village in the Indian state of Punjab, was the firstborn in his family. Over time, a second child, Mohan Singh, joined the family. The father worked as a farmer on a small plot where the family lived. The atmosphere at Tarakjot Singh's home was always tense, with Mohan Singh resorting to excessive cruelty to resolve conflicts, instilling fear in his sons. However, their mother created a comforting refuge for the brothers. They cherished their maternal grandparents and felt safe in their company. Tarakjot was renowned for his kindness and sincerity, brightening the spirits of those around him. Excelling as a student, he thirsted for knowledge and refused to accept mediocrity. As he approached the senior years, Tarakjot faced the decision of his future education. With excellent grades, he demonstrated he was headed towards a successful career. By 2016, when Tarakjot completed school, his grandparents managed to gather a small sum to help him relocate. Australia had long been calling him, and he finally seized the opportunity to become a resident of charming Adelaide, like many young people at that time. He successfully passed the standard English language test, a prerequisite for admission to the University of South Australia. Joining the ranks of students, numerous directions and fields of study opened up before Tarakjot. Contemplating his choices, he opted for information technology and aimed for a bachelor's degree. Simultaneously, he had to work to support himself and progress further. For Tarakjot, this was not a challenge. He explored various jobs, most related to elderly care. Colleagues loved and respected him, and employers valued his honesty and kindness, always leaving positive reviews and recommendations for him. However, he continued to work diligently, showing compassion and helping the less fortunate, which soon became his true calling. Over time, Tarakjot's fortunes improved. He saved up money and moved to a separate apartment in the city suburbs, where he lived with another young man whom he quickly befriended. In 2018, when Tarakjot and Jasmine first crossed paths, she had already achieved significant success in her profession. Colleagues praised her unwavering dedication and optimism, and her employer admired her. This sweet, kind-hearted girl, it's no wonder that Tarakjot, who was loved for the same qualities, quickly bonded with Jasmine through workplace interactions and attending collective events together. Their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship, and by April 2020, they were a loving couple. Tarakjot never hid his true intentions. Now he openly declared that he saw in Jasmine the woman with whom he wanted to build a life and a strong family. However, over time, he became increasingly insecure. Tarakjot suddenly doubted Jasmine's actions and motives. Jealousy consumed him, and he began demanding detailed reports from her about where she had been and with whom she had interacted. He tried to control her every move, and if she planned to meet friends after work, he would instantly become furious. Persistent calls and unfounded accusations became part of his behavior, and one day he demanded that Jasmine leave her friends and return home immediately. For Jasmine, such a life became unbearable. Unable to endure it, she confided in her mother. Upon learning of the total control exerted by her daughter's suitor, the mother naturally disapproved of their relationship. However, Tarakjot paid no attention to others' objections, fully immersed in his own world. Desiring assurance that his beloved would be with him for a lifetime, in October 2020, Tarakjot bought engagement rings and proposed to Jasmine. Despite disagreements and clear signs, she agreed to be his wife. However, the engagement did not calm Tarakjot. It only heightened his suspicions. Now, using any available free time, he would appear unexpectedly at Jasmine's workplace with the sole purpose of keeping an eye on her. Experiencing the euphoria of the proposal, Jasmine regained her composure and began to reconsider her fiancé's behavior. Doubts plagued her, and the idea of ending the relationship increasingly occupied her thoughts. Realizing that her association with Tarakjot negatively impacted her mental and emotional health, on January 4, 2021, Jasmine informed him that they had to part ways. In response, she faced angry threats and words from Tarakjot, claiming that if she left him, he would end his own life. The next day after finishing work, Jasmine noticed Tariq Jot watching her from the window during the break. She went to talk to him, and he once again pleaded for her to stay. However, she remained resolute in her decision. That's when Tariq Jot started threatening self-harm and insisted that she would be responsible for anything that happened to him. On the same evening, Jasmine learned that Tariq Jot had taken a large amount of sleeping pills. She never took his words seriously and never thought he was capable of such actions. Concerned, she urgently contacted his apartment neighbor. The friend arrived and took Tariq Jot to the hospital, where he wrote a statement claiming he had attempted suicide, but didn't Tariq Jot take responsibility for that decision. In their breakup, Tariq Jot blamed Jasmine's family, insinuating that her relatives influenced her decision to end their relationship. The next morning, on January 6, 2021, a psychiatrist examined Tariq Jot, finding no signs of mental illness, but concluding that the overdose was likely linked to an inability to cope with the relationship's breakup. Tariq Jot was discharged, but just a few hours later, the former fiancé unexpectedly appeared at Jasmine's home, insisting that she go with him to discuss something important. His real intention, however, was to persuade her to reconsider and restart the relationship. This attempt failed again as Jasmine refused. In a desperate attempt to win her back, he threatened to publicly release their intimate video. Tariq Jot knew that this would be unbearable for Jasmine's respectable family. The manipulation did not achieve the desired effect, and faced with Jasmine's indifference, Tariq Jot sent the video to her mother. Shocked, her mother contacted her daughter, who was furious about the situation. The next day, the jealous ex showed up at Jasmine's workplace, standing next to his car and patiently waiting for her to finish her shift despite her ignoring him and simply leaving. Tariq Jot persistently followed Jasmine in his car but suddenly gave up, allowing her to reach home undisturbed. That night, emotionally exhausted, Jasmine couldn't sleep properly. The pressure from Tariq Jot intensified every day, as he threatened to share intimate videos with more people if she didn't return to him immediately. January 28, 2021, became a critical day for Jasmine. Unable to endure it any longer, she officially reported her ex-fiancé to the police for harassment. Every detail of their relationship was documented on paper. Given the seriousness of the case, the police initiated an investigation and met with Tariq Jot on February 9th to understand the situation. As a result, he received a warning for his unacceptable behavior. It's worth noting that by this point, Tariq Jot had developed a habit of composing text messages containing insults and mockery, even though most of these messages were never sent to Jasmine. They indicated the extent of his obsession. A few days later, the young man attempted suicide again, but his neighbor discovered him in time. When asked about the reasons for his actions in the hospital, Tariq Jot said he couldn't cope with the breakup and begged not to be hospitalized. Surprisingly, his plea was heeded, and he was discharged under medical observation. A few days later, he began taking medication prescribed by doctors for depression, anxiety, and agitation. However, at the same time, thoughts of harming Jasmine became increasingly intrusive in his mind. Focused and meticulous, Tariq Jot began developing his sinister plan on March 4, 2021. He managed to obtain a map marking the locations of almost all surveillance cameras in Adelaide. The next day, he inserted his SIM card into another phone and left it at home to create an alibi. To avoid being detected by cameras or recognized by anyone he knew, he temporarily borrowed his neighbor's blue Jeep. On the same day, he purchased gloves, cable ties, and a shovel from a hardware store. The only thing he overlooked was that every move of his was recorded by surveillance cameras in the store. He then drove to Jasmine's workplace, where he waited for her to finish around 10 p.m. As she completed her shift and stepped onto a deserted street, unsuspecting of what awaited her, Tariq Jot suddenly attacked her. Grabbing her arms, he dragged her into the car. In the vehicle, he taped Jasmine's mouth and eyes, tied her hands and feet, and driving to a secluded spot, transferred his former fiancée to the trunk of the car. He proceeded north towards another city, nearly 400 kilometers away from Adelaide, between 10:30 p.m. and 3:30 a.m. Throughout the entire route, 5 city surveillance cameras several times captured the car he was using. Upon reaching a location known only to him, Tariq Jot got out of the car and began digging a shallow grave near the road in this area. He then opened the trunk and attempted to injure Jasmine with a knife to the throat, but failing to inflict significant damage, he didn't complete the act. Instead, he lowered the girl into the grave and began burying her alive. All of this happened at dawn on March 6th. After burying her, Tariq got back in the car, drove away, discarded Jasmine's belongings along with the remaining cable ties, tape, and other items, and disposed of the gloves and balaclava at a location known as the Death Rock. On the same day, noticing that Jasmine had not returned home, her family began to worry. When she did not show up for work, her employer became concerned, especially upon realizing that her car was still parked in front of the building. Unaware of Jasmine's whereabouts, her relatives contacted the authorities and filed a missing person report. For the detective in charge of the investigation, it seemed unlikely that the girl had left voluntarily. He was convinced that she was being held against her will. The detective reviewed surveillance footage at Jasmine's workplace, hoping to find a lead. Eventually, one recording from the last night featured a person near the building, who for most of the morning drove towards another city. To accurately identify the suspect, authorities issued a public appeal to anyone with information about a young man around 20 years old who had contact with Jasmine or was in the vicinity in the days leading up to her disappearance. Unfortunately, no one came forward. On March 7th, investigators approached Tariq Jot to speak with him regarding prior police reports of stalking. Initially, he denied any involvement in the girl's disappearance. However, later he confessed to investigators that he had argued with Jasmine and she allegedly attempted suicide. According to Tariq Jot, after his fiancée lost consciousness, he assumed she had died and buried her in a remote location. The next day, the apprehended suspect led the police to a gruesome pit where he had buried Jasmine's body. She was buried under a 30 centimeters layer of sand, with her hands tied behind her back, legs restrained with cable ties, and her eyes and mouth taped shut. Although the victim's throat had been cut, the wounds appeared to be superficial. The body was sent for forensic examination, and criminal charges were promptly filed against Tariq Jot for failing to report the girl's death, a mandatory requirement. As a result, he was restricted from leaving his place of residence. During a detailed interrogation, serious inconsistencies emerged in Tariq Jot's statements, leading to his arrest. The autopsy report revealed that Jasmine was still alive at the time of burial, and the cause of death was lack of air. These findings shed light on the horrifying nature of the events. On March 8, 2021, Tariq Jot was charged with murder and placed in pretrial detention, despite asserting his innocence. He was denied bail. A few days later, a passerby discovered evidence implicating Tariq Jot, including Jasmine's belongings. Instead, his lawyer appeared on his behalf, proclaiming his innocence and actively defending him. The trial was postponed until February 6, 2023, when Tariq Jot pleaded guilty in the Adelaide Supreme Court. He openly admitted to kidnapping Jasmine with the intention of taking her life. His confession spared the grieving family from the ordeal of a lengthy trial that would have brought up painful questions. 5 months later, on July 5, 2023, in the South Australian Supreme Court, the judge sentenced Tariq Jot to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 22 years and 10 months. This meant he could be eligible for parole, but if released, Tariq Jot would have to leave the country. During the hearing, the judge explained to Tariq Jot the seriousness of his actions, highlighting that the murder of Jasmine was premeditated, with the perpetrator fully aware of the monstrous nature of the act. The sentencing hearing occurred on August 1, 2023. Considering various factors, such as age, mental health issues, and origin, the judge decided that the non-parole period should be over 20 years. Tariq Jote was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 22 years and 10 months. Although this brought some relief to the family, Rachel expressed that she would never truly be happy again, as her greatest wish was to have her daughter back with her. The grieving mother continued to miss their daily conversations and nightly goodnight wishes, a routine they had shared for almost 20 years. Despite justice being served, the thought that the perpetrator could potentially be released in just 22 years weighed heavily on them as they faced the rest of their lives without Jasmine. The close relatives of the deceased decided to create memorial spaces at home to ensure they never forget her pure soul and kind heart. Cedras commune, located in the department of Santa Maria near Cord City in Argentina, was home to Ana Rosa Berra, a 40-year-old woman with dreams of becoming a grandmother. Family friends described her as having a courageous character and adventurous spirit. When faced with starting over, she courageously moved forward. According to some reports, she lived in a tent for 4 years. However, the specific reasons for this remain unknown. Ana Rosa worked at the Secretariat for Children, Adolescents, and Families in Cordoba, a job she loved. She also co-ran an upholstery workshop with her partner Marcelo Fabio Ferretto. They met when she began sewing for his business. By 2017, Ana Rosa was 46 and Marcelo 51. They had been living together for a decade and practiced Reiki together. This complementary therapy involves applying palms to restore physical, mental, and spiritual balance. Nonetheless, the couple faced challenges and disagreements became prevalent. Both had 4 children from prior relationships. 2 of Ana Rosa's children resided in Salto province. The other 2 were abroad, one in France and another set to become a father in Bolivia. Her parents and siblings lived in Cordoba too. Ana Rosa had a positive relationship with her colleagues who frequently met both her and Marcelo. He worked as a wallpaper maker with his workshop near their home. Close acquaintances observed him as jealous and controlling, which increasingly irritated Ana Rosa. On Sunday, May 28th, the couple visited relatives in Villa Lend City. During their journey back, they argued intensely when Marcelo checked Ana Rosa's cell phone. The dispute continued at home into early Monday morning. Neighbors overheard them yelling and hurling insults at each other before things momentarily calmed down, only temporarily though. Hours later, Marcelo reported his wife as missing to the police. Despite various reports on when the man filed his report, most sources agreed he visited the 18th police station on Tuesday, May 30th. Marcelo informed the police and repeated to the media that he woke up at 6 a.m. that Monday morning, as usual, but his wife was already gone. He explained that Ana Rosa would typically rise early to feed the dogs before leaving home. Until then, everything seemed like a typical Monday, with Marcelo following his regular routine. The news of Ana Rosa's disappearance shocked Los Cerdos residents and the province. Her husband's statements indicated that the last time he saw her was Sunday night when they went to bed. Digital newspapers and TV stations reported Marcelo grew concerned upon receiving calls from Ana Rosa's colleagues puzzled by her absence from work, as she was not one to be absent without a valid reason. Marcelo recalled that on Monday, during a visit to a drugstore for some shopping, he stumbled upon Ana Rosa's white Chevrolet parked on Rainier Avenue in front of a beauty salon in Santa Isabel, strategically located between their home and her workplace. Her personal items and keys were in the car. Only her cell phone was missing. Marcelo claimed he had called her multiple times, and even friends and children left messages, all without response. The last WhatsApp message sent by Ana Rosa occurred at 10:40 p.m. on Sunday, May 28th. Individuals familiar with the case remained uncertain about what might have occurred or if she fell victim to a crime. Since submitting his report, Marcelo has stayed in constant contact with police while also leveraging social media and traditional media to aid in locating his wife. During an interview with reporters, Marcelo noted that Ana Rosa intended to go swimming at the gym early on the day she disappeared and had plans to meet with a trauma surgeon later. The most critical aspect for him is having her home safely. Regarding finding her car, Marcelo described exiting the pharmacy on Monday afternoon to see her vehicle outside a beauty and massage parlor. Considering Ana Rosa had complained of neck pain earlier, he decided to check if she was inside the salon. As he possessed a spare key for the car, he opened it and went through her belongings inside. He mentioned briefly suspecting she'd perhaps left due to an argument early Monday morning, but soon focused solely on finding her. The sequence of events as narrated by Marcelo paints a picture filled with anxiety and concern over his wife's sudden disappearance. According to his Reiki teacher, if she decided to leave, he should leave her alone. Prosecutor Legandro Altatonello of Altagraci took over the case. The investigation began immediately. Initially, several hypotheses were put forward. On the one hand, there was the possibility that Ana Rosa was the victim of kidnapping or robbery. They also considered the possibility of revenge. It wasn't excluded that she left voluntarily. As part of the investigation, Marcelo testified for more than 14 hours on Wednesday, May 31st. He gradually began to fall into a series of contradictions that, to the investigator, showed him less and less as the distraught husband of the missing woman, and more as the prime suspect in her disappearance. Everything Marcelo said made no sense to the detectives. Plus, his moods went through different stages, which alarmed experienced forensic investigators. At first, he seemed euphoric, confident, constantly giving interviews to the press. Then he began to extol his innocence, giving details nobody had asked about, and even tried to justify himself by talking about his relationship with Ana Rosa and her anger at him. Marcelo also began to say directly and without question that he couldn't have done anything wrong to his partner. The circumstances of Ana Rosa's car appearing at the scene where it was found, and Marcelo's explanation of its discovery, raised several doubts. According to witnesses living in that area where the car was found, it was left by a man in gray clothing, not a woman. As hours passed, despair grew among Ana Rosa's loved ones. Despite intensive search efforts, there were no results. While the search continued, investigative authorities pursued leads diligently. The prosecutor in charge felt convinced Marcelo was hiding something and insisted on a deeper investigation into this suspect. On Friday, June 2nd, during another meeting with police officers, Marcelo changed his attitude. He became calmer. Yet when detectives presented him with cell phone antenna data showing movements that didn't match his story, the man broke down and revealed the truth came out. Marcelo admitted to the tragic killing of Ana Rosa, disclosing that he ran her down and then dismembered body to dispose of the remains. Following his confession, he also indicated where he had buried the dismembered of his partner of the last decade. A few hours later, police supported by a canine unit discovered Ana Rosa's remains. Excavations began around 2:30 p.m., concluding the search and uncovering her dismembered body in a hole Marcelo had dug himself. This area was situated on a dirt road, located in the countryside opposite a factory and roughly 200 meters away from Highway 5, which links the provincial capital with Altagracia. According to prosecutor Peralta Tonello, Marcelo was quite familiar with this location as he frequently visited it for work-related purposes. Everything Marcelo had previously stated turned out to be false, except for mentioning an early Monday morning quarrel. For Ana Rosa's family and friends, their worst fears materialized step by step. The prayers and hopes that she would return soon shifted into pleas for comfort and justice following this devastating revelation. The grief-stricken tears of uncertainty transformed into cries of irreparable loss and anger directed at the killer who had deceived everyone for days. Marcelo's acquaintances described him as jealous and manipulative, someone who kept Ana Rosa preoccupied with endless questions and demands. His controlling nature came to light during the investigation when it was found that he had hacked into Ana Rosa's social media account after managing to crack the password. The profile gathered on Marcelo revealed he knew all of Ana Rosa's passwords even prior to committing the crime. According to reconstructed events, they had been fighting throughout the weekend before she was reported missing. Marcelo's extreme jealousy ultimately led to this tragedy. Amidst one such heated argument, he struck her multiple times with a sledgehammer until she died. Attempting initially to place her lifeless body in his car but failing, he resorted to using a knife to dismember it. He then placed the remains in his vehicle and drove to the location where they were discovered days later. Pleading guilty, a new search was initiated on Friday at the residence shared by defendant and Ana Rosa. Various tools, including cleavers and knives of different sizes, were found during the search. Marcelo was arrested and spent his first night in jail. He charges of aggravated murder, femicide, and gender-based violence, all carrying life sentences. Prosecutor Peralta Atema clarified that Marcelo's admission could not be considered a full confession. Thus, the record noted he admitted to the crime while being interviewed as a witness. Further statements would be made once sufficient evidence was gathered. Documents essential to the case include the final autopsy report, forensic analysis of vehicles and items collected during searches, and outcomes of luminol tests at multiple locations. The defendant's attorney, Jose Luis Saca, stated that despite Marcelo's admission, he would seek his client's release. He argued that police statements held no legal authority, but could guide the prosecutor's procedural decisions without being definitive. Additionally, the defense attorney stated his client would not provide any testimony. Examinations continued over the weekend, and on Monday, June 5th, a preliminary autopsy report was published. This report indicated that Ana Rosa's cause of death was severe head trauma. The defendant's lawyer mentioned awaiting the lifting of secrecy to review evidence against Marcelo. He emphasized that psychiatric and psychological evaluations were crucial in understanding Marcelo's emotional state, possibly a significant aspect for the defense. On June 9th, it emerged that luminol tests conducted at their residence showed significant blood amounts had been washed into the patio area. The medical examiners discovered new insights after performing autopsies, noting cuts on the extremities inflicted by someone skilled with a knife. A significant wound, measuring 18 centimeters long and 7 centimeters deep, was found on the victim's neck, extending to the cervical region. Given these findings, the prosecutor's office charged Marcelo Fabio Ferreira with double aggravated murder due to his relationship with the victim and gender-based violence. After Ana Rosa went missing, her acquaintances shared information about her partner, and their relationship with both media and authorities. Viviana Lujan, a friend of Ana Rosa, mentioned that Ana started changing her style and stopped wearing lace-up shoes to work. She let down her hair and told Viviana that she felt prettier and more feminine. According to Viviana, these changes led to arguments with Marcelo. Other friends also noted that Ana Rosa had been in high spirits lately and seemed happy. She confided that she and Marcelo were experiencing difficulties, but were making efforts to improve their relationship. The couple even took several short trips together. Marcelo's trial for Ana Rosa's murder commenced nearly 2 years after the incident. The prosecutor's office presented the gravity of the charges to the jury meticulously. Final autopsy results revealed that Ana Rosa suffered a severe blunt force blow to the face, rendering her unconscious. Subsequently, multiple blows to the head resulted in a crushed skull. During the first hearing, Marcelo chose to remain silent while witness testimonies followed. Deborah Territorios, one of Ana Rosa's daughters and the first witness, testified that since her mother met Marcelo, she had grown distant from her children and other family members. Deborah explained they were initially compelled to move from Salta with their father, followed by her older siblings' relocation. This geographic separation worsened communication gaps with their mother. She noted that when alone with their mother, Ana Rosa was loving and attentive. However, whenever Marcelo appeared, her mother became distant. Deborah even mentioned hurriedly leaving her mother's house whenever she knew Marcelo was about to arrive. Ana Rosa's cousin, Roberto Enrique Reina, testified about the events that transpired on May 28, 2017, in his house where the altercation began. Roberto provided a detailed account of the quarrel. According to his testimony, the dispute originated from a message Marcelo discovered on Ana Rosa's cell phone. However, Roberto noted that Marcelo's jealousy appeared typical and not particularly unusual, which did not substantially benefit the prosecution. The prosecutor highlighted the accused's dominance over the victim, pointing out asymmetrical power dynamics and objectification of the woman in front of others. In terms of gender violence, the case file referred to evidence of obsessive jealousy from Marcelo. He enrolled in the same classes Ana Rosa attended, synchronized their schedules, and exerted complete control over her movements. The defense strategy focused on modifying the charges and scrutinizing actions, leading to Marcelo's confession to the police that he committed the crime. It is important to note that at that time, Marcelo was testifying as a witness without legal representation present. If it can be established that law enforcement was already targeting him when he admitted to killing Ana Rosa, his confession might be deemed inadmissible, potentially invalidating other associated case files. Nevertheless, the prosecutor argued successfully that Marcelo's admission of guilt was evaluated against Supreme Court precedents and was accepted as evidence, despite lacking an attorney's presence during his statement. The second day of hearings saw continued testimonies. Notably, Fernanda Filimia, who was Ana Rosa's girlfriend, provided insights into Marcelo's behavior. According to her testimony, he had been controlling and increasingly violent shortly before Ana Rosa's tragic death. Fernanda, a colleague of the victim, testified that when Ana Rosa started her relationship with Marcelo, she became distant, but later tried to renew their friendship. Fernanda mentioned that Marcelo tried to follow his partner's every move. Notably, he even started taking Reiki classes after Ana Rosa began attending them. The indictment indicates that after starting energy harmonization therapy, Ana Rosa told her friend she felt good. She had mended her relationships with her mother, sister, and children, and intended to visit her son in Bolivia. Yet, as these positive changes began, Marcelo's behavior grew increasingly aggressive. Fernanda reported that Ana Rosa once remarked that women could achieve things with a great attitude. Marcelo angrily retorted that they were all fools who would end up dying in a ditch. Fernanda also noted the couple hadn't been living in the same room lately. Ana Rosa slept upstairs, Marcelo downstairs. On the hearing's second day, Claudio Bustamante, a police officer who took Marcelo's statement on May 2, 2017, gave his testimony as well. He assured the jury it was spontaneous. Marcelo had confessed without any pressure from him during the interrogation. Marcelo mentioned that on Monday, Ana Rosa informed him that he no longer satisfied her and admitted to infidelity. He confessed that this revelation made him angry, leading him to strike her, although he could not recall with what. Marcelo then recounted falling asleep at the table, waking up later to go to bed. He described the experience as dreamlike and surreal. He firmly believes that if he had been fully conscious, he wouldn't have committed such an act. With visible emotion, Marcelo apologized to the community, Ana Rosa's family, and his own relatives for the pain caused. On April 11th, the jury of the 11th Criminal Court found Marcelo Favio guilty of Ana Rosa Barrera's double aggravated murder. He received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 35 years, contingent on demonstrating good behavior. Upon hearing the verdict, the victim's family expressed their anguish and directed shouts and curses at Marcelo as he was swiftly escorted from the courtroom. The prosecutor remarked that the jury's decision aligned with the prosecution's request. Evidence demonstrated that Marcelo Favio acted with full awareness and had premeditated his actions against Ana Rosa. Prosecutors asserted that claiming a lack of full consciousness during the crime was a deliberate attempt to evade the maximum penalty. Known as the heart of the Bay, Hayward, California is the central point to other cities in the East Bay Area. Its residents are described as having a lot of love and community spirit, and its suburban vibe makes it an ideal place to live for families. With the second most diverse population in California, Hayward is as welcoming as its people. Hayward is home to the beautiful Cal State University, and in 1988, Michaela Garrick and her family called it home. 9-year-old Michaela Joy Garrick was called a miracle child by her parents Susan Murch and Rod Garrick. For 5 years, Susan and Rod turned to doctors and fertility treatments before finally welcoming their beautiful daughter into the world. Michaela was born on January 24, 1979, in Oakland, California. Although it was a struggle to conceive Michaela, her parents called her their blessing, as soon after her birth, they welcomed another daughter, Libby, and a son, Alex. In 1986, they made the move to Hayward, where they decided to set down roots and raise their growing family. Michaela was described as a bright and lively child. She was well-behaved and listened to everything her parents told her. Sharon was described as a very caring mother, sometimes considered overprotective. She'd made sure her children were always kept close to home and under no circumstances wandered far without adult supervision. No one could blame her, though. The 1980s saw an increase in child abductions, particularly in the California area. It was a Saturday morning, November 19, 1988, and Michaela had just finished eating breakfast with her family. When a best friend, 9-year-old Katrina Rodriguez, came over to ask Sharon if she and Michaela could go down to the local grocery store to buy snacks, the response was initially a firm no. Upset but not deterred, Michaela begged and pleaded with her mother, promising they'd be safe and come back quickly. Knowing her little girl was going to grow up sooner or later, Sharon relented and allowed them to go while reminding them to be careful. She gave Michaela $5, and the girls excitedly grabbed their scooters. Michaela turned to Sharon and said, "I love you, Mom," before they made their way down the block and out of sight as Sharon watched them go. Her husband, Rod, decided to go out and do some work on the car, while Sharon went back in to clear up the breakfast dishes, unaware that in the next few minutes, her life was going to change forever. Michaela and Katrina excitedly rode their scooters toward the Rainbow Market on Mission Boulevard. Parking their scooters just in front of the store, both girls make their way inside to buy some snacks. After buying 2 Mountain Dew sodas, 2 sticks of beef jerky, and 2 pieces of cherry toffee, they walked out of the store, completely forgetting about their scooters as they chatted about plans for the holiday. Before they could leave the parking lot, though, both girls realized their scooters were still outside the store. One was missing, and Michaela and Katrina decided to split up to find the other scooter. Michaela spotted it first. It had been moved about 3 parking spaces away and left next to a car. Without thinking, Michaela ran over to the scooter and bent down to grab hold of the handlebars. In a split second, a man had jumped out of the car and grabbed Michaela around the waist before shoving her into the back seat. Like a deer in the headlights, Katrina stood frozen to the spot as she heard her friend's screams and watched her struggle in the abductor's grip. The man peeled out of the parking space before speeding out on Mission Boulevard, heading toward Union City. Katrina immediately ran back into the store and told the cashier, Rona Ronalyn, that Michaela had just been kidnapped. Rona called the local police, who arrived in record time to the crime scene. She also contacted Katrina's father and told them what just happened at the store. Back at their home, Sharon was busy washing up the dishes when she heard frantic shouting from the outside. Rod, her husband, burst through the front door, telling her Michaela had just been kidnapped outside the Rainbow Market. Along with Katrina's father, they make their way down to the store to find police swarming the area and speaking to customers and staff from the store. Katrina was inconsolable and was allowed to go back home with her father. Rod and Sharon remained behind, hoping to get some answers. But from deep within, a seed of fear took root as Sharon remembered a poem Michaela had written. Sharon remembered an unsettling incident just a week earlier. She'd woken up to find Michaela sitting at the breakfast table, writing in the early hours of the morning. When she asked her what she was doing, Michaela told her mother she was writing a poem, but was being vague. Sharon kept asking her what the poem was about, and Michaela said she woke up after hearing noises coming from the attic and thought about people who had been kidnapped and locked away in the attic. She then told Sharon that her poem was about people who were kidnapped and being held captive, not people who were kidnapped and killed. Sharon at the time found it rather ominous that a child as cheerful as Michaela would write a poem like this. Looking back now, She believed Michaela may have written the poem as a kind of prophecy or premonition. Rona, the cashier, was fortunately able to remember the man who allegedly took Michaela. She described him to police as a white male in his 30s with a mustache. She was able to make up the color of the car as being either burgundy or maroon, but could not give them details about the make or model. Rona told police that the man had parked his car and got out, but not entered the store. Instead, he looked on the outside and looked through the window, watching the girls and other customers. She also had a feeling he was planning on possibly robbing the store. A sketch artist quickly drew a composite sketch and circulated the picture to all police stations in the area and news outlets. Investigators found the scooter and took it in as evidence. From the scooter handle, they were able to lift a latent handprint. The print was filed away to be used to identify the kidnapper, but beyond that, there were few clues they could follow up on. By the end of the first day after the abduction, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the investigation into Michaela's abduction. Given the recent spate of child abductions, the FBI were sure there must have been some link between Michaela's disappearance and that of the other missing children. However, police soon realized that Katrina may be able to give a bit more information on the suspect, as she was the key eyewitness to the abduction. 2 days after the incident, investigators paid a visit to Katrina's family home, and together with her parents, sat down and spoke to her. What she revealed had investigators reeling. The description of the kidnapper was drastically different to the one given by the store cashier. Katrina described the man as being a white male in his early 20s with long, dirty blonde hair. She said he had severe acne that scarred his face and described his eyes as being blue. Katrina remembered his eyes in particular and said to investigators, "He had fox eyes. He looked right at me, but didn't even see me." She also told investigators that his car had been either beige or tan, box-shaped, with visible body damage. This new description was concerning, as investigators realized the most crucial 48 hours had passed while they were looking for the wrong person. The posters were reprinted with the new suspect's image and redistributed in hopes of being able to garner new leads. With the new information, though, investigators now began knocking on the doors of all sex offenders in the local area, asking questions. Volunteers came out in their numbers, knocking on doors and handing out posters that included a description of Michaela's clothes: white t-shirt with the word Metro written across it, rolled up blue denim jeans, black Mary Jane shoes, and pearl-colored feather shoot earrings. When no one reported any signs of Michaela anywhere in the nearby suburbs, police extended the search to include McGarren National Park and Niles Canyon that were just minutes from the Garrick family home. The search began following a tip from 3 hikers who allegedly saw footprints in the forested area belonging to 1 adult and 1 child. After they'd followed the tracks, they found a blanket and empty fast food containers. The psychological profile also pointed out that the kidnapper was likely to take Michaela to an isolated area. Helicopters were fitted with infrared thermal cameras to pick up any signs of a heat signature within the dense wooded areas. Police officers searched on horseback and foot. All these efforts yielded no results. Michaela had vanished along with her kidnapper into thin air. Michaela's disappearance reached the national news. Her story was featured on Unsolved Mysteries and was one of the first child abductions to feature on America's Most Wanted. Her face was printed on milk cartons, and the Missing Children's Program printed over 50 million mail-in cards to homes around the country with pictures of Michaela, a description of her clothes, and a composite sketch of the kidnappers. San Francisco 49ers quarterback Joe Montana came out in support of the Garrick family and made an appeal to the public to come forward with any information. A reward fund of $70,000 was posted during this time for any information regarding Michaela's whereabouts. Within the first year of her disappearance, police had received over 5,000 tips, most of which turned out to be rumors. But no one was ready to give up. Sharon herself followed leads, some stretching as far as Russia, but nothing yielded any results. It would take another 4 years before investigators received a new tip that they believed could be real. In that time, over 15,000 tips were received, and police were clutching at each one, hoping it could shed light on the missing girls case. Between 1991 and 1992, an inmate in Indiana came forward with information regarding Michaela's disappearance. Roger Haggard, who was serving an 11-year sentence for a burglary charge, alleged that he helped a friend bury her body in a gladiolus field in Union City. However, investigators were not initially interested, believing it could have been a wild goose chase. When Haggard realized the investigators were not taking his claims seriously, he instead turned to the media. He wrote a letter in 1992 to the San Francisco Chronicle claiming to know who kidnapped Michaela and where she'd been buried. He promised to lead investigators to her body. The media attention and public outcry forced investigators to fly Haggard to California in order to testify in front of a grand jury. Under oath, Haggard repeated the claims he'd been making to investigators. Haggard promised to lead investigators not only to Michaela's remains, but to the home of the alleged killer. The next day, Haggard, along with a team of investigators, searched the field that he claimed Michaela's body had been buried in. In a shocking twist, after 8 hours of intense searching, Haggard allegedly told police that he'd made a false claim after all. He told investigators that he allegedly wanted to give the Garrick family a sense of peace after all these years. Haggard was charged with perjury and sentenced to another 6 years in prison and ordered to pay Michaela's family $6,000 in damages for giving them false hope. Each new lead was about to take investigators down a darker path than they'd imagined. Another person of interest had long been on police radar in 1991. Timothy Binder was a 43-year-old sewage treatment plant worker. He was married with a family, but investigators were tipped off by parents in the East Bay area about Binder's creepy behavior. Parents alleged that he'd been sending young girls gifts and money in order to get closer to them. Some of the letters were reportedly written backwards and could only be read by using a mirror. Investigators looked at the Binder's background and discovered that Binder drove a light blue van with a license plate that read, "Love You." The inside of his van was allegedly covered with pictures of little children, crayon drawings, and Bible verses. According to reports, he'd been arrested for attempting to lure 2 young girls into his van, but the charges were dropped. Binder, investigators discovered, had a knack for inserting himself into the cases surrounding missing children. He had made contact with Michaela's mother, Sharon, following her disappearance in November of 1988. Prior to that, he'd also made contact with Kim Schwartz, the mother of 7-year-old Amber Schwartz, who'd gone missing in June of the same year. Both mothers reportedly told police they did not have a good feeling about Binder, and that he persisted in contacting them regarding the developments in both cases. In an eerie coincidence, Binder had written a letter to the police after Amber had disappeared. In the letter, he claimed that the next child to go missing would be a 9-year-old girl, and weirdly enough, Michaela was the next child reported missing. In early December, Binder also sent a Christmas card to an FBI profiler with a picture of a girl holding up 4 fingers. On December 27, 1991, Amanda Campbell, who was aged 4, went missing from her home in Fairfield. Binder was also linked to the disappearance of 13-year-old Eileen Michelhoff from Dublin in California. In the trend of events, his generally strange behavior and interest in these cases started to garner him media attention. His name had become synonymous with the recent spate of child abductions, and people turned against him. Binder and his family were being harassed by the public who wanted answers for all the kidnappings. He eventually sued the city of Fairfield for defamation and won the case. Investigators eventually eased off on Binder, with many of the opinion that all he wanted to do was play an important role in the investigation. Beneath all the mysteries, the case continued to captivate the public and challenge the investigators. Christine Anderson had also come under scrutiny following his capture and arrest in August of 2000. Following his arrest, Anderson admitted to the abduction and murder of 7-year-old Ziana Fairchild from Vallejo, California in 1999. In a 2007 interview with the FBI, Anderson claimed to have killed another 13 women and girls. He also alleged to have abducted and murdered 7-year-old Amber Schwartz, who he saw standing on a street corner. Before he could provide investigators with more information, though, He died on December 9, 2007, from kidney and liver failure. Investigators looked into Anderson's background after his confession about killing multiple girls in his past. Records show that Anderson was pulled over in 1989 while driving a brown 1977 Chevy sedan that matched the vehicle description given by Katrina as well. However, his death left investigators unable to probe that line of investigation. Hope wasn't lost, though. The renewed effort of investigators brought Michaela's kidnapping back into the spotlight, and with it, more attention and new leads. Another twist comes in August 2012. Wesley Shermantine, who was one half of the murderous duo known as the Speed Freaks, contacted the Stockton Record following the suicide of his partner in crime, Lauren Herzog, in January of that year. He pointed out that Herzog bore a striking resemblance to the composite of the suspect in Michaela's case. This was strengthened by Katrina's comments that Herzog had features that looked very much like the man who kidnapped Michaela. At the direction of Shermantine, investigators began digging up a well in Linden, California, where the duo allegedly disposed of their victims. Thousands of bone fragments were discovered, some of which were believed to belong to Michaela. While the investigators never left hope of solving the case, the mystery kept baffling them further. 8 more years would pass before investigators could find a promising lead. The events that took place during this crime were truly shocking and left a lasting impact on the public. But the real shocker was yet to come. On December 21, 2020, the Haywood Police Department and FBI announced that they'd made an arrest in the case of Michaela Garrett. David Misch, who was 61 years old as of 2022, was charged with the kidnapping and murder of Michaela after his fingerprints were linked, using new technology, to those lifted from the scooter in 1988. We can announce that 59-year-old David Misch had been charged with the murder of Michaela Garrett. He is in custody at Santa Rita Jail, here at Alameda County. A look into Misch's background painted a shocking picture of a man who escaped justice for far too long. David Emery Misch was born on February 19, 1961, in Chicago, Illinois. Not much is known about his life growing up, but by the time he was 16, he had already begun his life of crime. In 1977, Misch was convicted of breaking and entering a property and sexually assaulting a maid at knife point. He was arrested but was paroled only a year later in 1978. In February 1979, he was arrested on charges of false imprisonment and assault with a deadly weapon. Those charges were later updated to assault with intent to rape. Once again, he would qualify for parole in September 1981. May 1988. He was arrested for burglary at the San Leandro grocery store and sentenced to 1 year in prison and 1 year probation. He was, however, released 6 months later in November of the same year. Karma finally caught up with them in December 1988. 38-year-old Margaret Ball was a longtime friend of Misch who often helped him out in a tough spot. It's not certain what transpired between the two, but Margaret was discovered by her stepdaughter beaten and stabbed to death in a pool of blood. The beating was so severe that her front tooth was found a few feet away from her body. Police were alerted to Misch as the suspect, as they would later find evidence linking him to the crime. He was arrested and convicted of Margaret's murder. He was sentenced to 18 years to life in 2018 while he was still incarcerated for Margaret Ball's murder. DNA evidence linked Misch to another double homicide in Fremont, California in 1986. 18-year-old Michelle Xavier and her best friend, 20-year-old Jennifer Dewey, went there to celebrate a birthday dinner of a family member on February 2, 1986. After leaving the restaurant, the young women drove to a convenience store before going home. Shortly after midnight, though, a motorcyclist found both women's bodies on the side of the road. They were stripped naked, and they'd been stabbed and shot. Later, an autopsy revealed that they were also sexually assaulted. Michelle's car was found 6 miles from the crime scene in the parking lot of a grocery store. The case was highly publicized, and rewards were offered, but over the years, all leads and tips would fizzle out, and the case went cold. 32 years later, DNA technology would lead detectives to David Misch. David Misch was charged with another 3 counts of murder, and one for abduction as he serves out his current sentence. Alameda District Attorney Nancy O'Malley said that Mish had been charged with murder and two special circumstances. If found guilty, he could be given a death sentence. Haywood Police Chief Tony Chaplin said the disappearance of Michaela Garrett was a tragic story that gripped the Bay Area for decades. He said they were not going to stop the search for Michaela's body and remains hopeful that they'll find her. Michaela's father, Rod Garrett, drove over 100 miles to attend the press conference. Rod said he finds some relief knowing Mish has been identified after all these years. "I'm kind of relieved that they caught someone over it, so now I don't gotta... They've got a suspect they can grill, and hopefully he'll cough up wherever the body is," he said. Sharing, who'd been diagnosed with metastatic cancer back in 2019, was unable to attend the press conference. Police Chief Tony Chaplin read a statement on her behalf. "In the last year, I had to come to a place of acceptance that Michaela was probably no longer alive. But somehow, that acceptance was far more wrapped up in the idea of Michaela sitting on a fluffy thin cloud, walking on streets of gold, dancing on grassy hills, soaring among the stars. What I did not envision was my daughter as a dead child. It was only when I heard this news that this vision of reality appeared, and I've honestly not figured out what to do with it." Mish's attorney, Arnie Castillo, has been outspoken about the case involving his client. He blasted the investigation, calling the methods used to charge Mish as junk science. He said that the sudden match of the handprint after 32 years just seemed ridiculous. Castillo insists that the police are trying to pin all the blame on Mish as an easy way to close the case. Now a middle-aged woman, Katrina Rodriguez, who married and moved away from Hayward to Texas, still harbors guilt over what happened that fateful Saturday morning. In her mind, it was meant to be her because the scooter that was moved belonged to Katrina. This burden of guilt has driven Katrina to forget her childhood. For Sharing, she dedicated her entire life to finding Michaela. First, she waited at the door of the telephone, and as the years passed, she turned to the internet, searching. Sharing eventually started a blog called Dear Michaela. Later, she changed it to Seekers Road. Sharon was eventually diagnosed with cancer, and after Mish was charged with Michaela's murder, the fight slowly faded out of her. She knew she would see her daughter soon. Sharon passed away in May 2022. There was one last twist to come in this already puzzling case. As David Mish awaits trial on the charges of kidnapping and murder in the case of Michaela Garrett and the murders of Michelle Xavier and Jennifer Dewey, new Alameda County District Attorney Pamela Price created a ripple among those who had been invested in seeing David Mish pay for his crimes. Price is drawing criticism after making the decision to drop all special circumstances in the 3 killings. If convicted of all 3 counts of murder, Mish no longer faces life in prison without parole or the death penalty. After waiting 3 decades to see Mish pay for his crimes, family, friends, and supporters from Michaela might have to face the reality that Mish could get away with his crimes without facing the appropriate justice. Child safety advocate Michael Claus, who's the father of Polly Claus, who was abducted and killed in 1993, said it was a complete and utter betrayal. Mish's defense attorney, Evie Castillo, welcomed the news. Each case relies heavily on questionable forensic tactics. Price's decision doesn't surprise me. In fact, it acknowledges the weakness in the case, he said. Retired Fremont Lieutenant Chuck Uhler, who worked on the 1986 Michelle Xavier and Jennifer Dewey murders, for which Mish has also been charged, said, "I think there's exceptions to every rule, and if anybody ever deserved maximum punishment, it's David Mish." A former prosecutor and KTVU legal analyst called the move reckless and said it was not a good idea to take any kind of punishment off the table from the get-go. As Michaela's body has still not been found, it could be a bargaining chip for later. This is the poster case for putting someone in prison forever to keep him away from society. David Mish awaits trial on 3 charges of murder and 1 of kidnapping. The case of Michaela Garrett has been a story filled with twists and turns that began with a case of mistaken identity that cost law enforcement the first crucial 48 hours of the investigation. It kept a family grasping at straws for decades. And now it may give an alleged killer the opportunity to deny any involvement and keep the truth of a little girl's body's whereabouts a mystery. What do you think of the case? In December 2021, the name Harmony Montgomery first hit headlines across the United States of America when a missing persons investigation was launched to find the 7-year-old girl. Since then, her father and stepmother have both been arrested and charged. A home where she used to live in Manchester, New Hampshire, has been searched for days on end, and the reward for information leading to her discovery has topped $140,000. But here's the strange thing. Before all of this, nobody seems to have set eyes on Harmony for more than 2 years. So, who is Harmony Montgomery? Why did it take so long for anyone to notice that this little girl has gone missing? Where has she been at all this time? And is it now too late to save her life? Hi, and welcome to Mysterious 7. I'm Michael, and today I want to take you guys through the story of little Harmony Montgomery, who dropped off the face of the earth back in 2019. Little Harmony wasn't born under a lucky star. Both her parents have a problematic history of substance abuse, and she had to cope with a visual disability in one eye through all of that. Her mother, Crystal Sorey, a resident of Massachusetts, lost custody due to addiction problems when her daughter was just about 4 years old. Sorey had to surrender Harmony to the state in the summer of 2018. After that, the girl's father, Adam Montgomery, secured sole custody in February 2019 and moved her to New Hampshire. Harmony was living with her father, Adam, as well as his wife, Kayla Montgomery, and their children at the property at the time when she went missing. The little girl had been in and out of foster care for much of her life, according to her files. Sometimes kids do get caught up in the legal system for years at a time. But Harmony wasn't one of the kids who slipped through the cracks of the foster care system. She went missing from her own father's house, and he never reported the matter, nor tried to reach out for help, nor find his daughter. So what exactly is his involvement in the disappearance of his child? Police said they first became aware of the case when they received a call from the girl's mother, Crystal Sorey, in November 2021. She had been trying to locate her daughter for months, but said she had been blocked by her ex-husband from contacting her. She said she last saw her daughter during a FaceTime video call with Adam Montgomery around Easter 2019. Sorey told the police that, since then, she unsuccessfully made attempts to find Harmony by contacting various schools and driving by addresses associated with Adam Montgomery. She said last year, he and his partner Kayla blocked all communication with her. According to news reports, Sorey had been sharing concerns over Harmony's well-being with Blair and Jonathan Miller, a couple who fostered and eventually adopted Harmony's younger brother Jameson in June 2019. The two were also actively trying to make a connection with Harmony and told Sorey multiple times they'd adopt her if the need arose. Harmony spent a lot of time in foster care with her younger biological brother Jameson. It seems that the couple, who said they repeatedly told Harmony's mother that they were willing to adopt the girl if need be, was very much interested in the hunt for the missing child. The couple actively tried to make contact with Harmony throughout the past 2 years, as they said Jameson missed her and that he'd cry at night for her. The couple said they weren't ever able to speak with Harmony and kept in touch with Sorey about her attempts to open a line of communication with the girl's father. On November 18, 2021, Sorey reported Harmony missing to the Manchester Police Department. Sorey made her first public appearance at the Candlelight Vigil on January 8th after authorities searched the last known residence of her daughter. "I just don't feel that in my heart," Sorey told reporters at the time. "Like, I don't feel like I lost her. And a mother knows. A mother knows if your baby's here or not. I know she's here." She had had this message for her daughter. "Hi, baby. If you can see me and hear me, I want you to know that I never stopped looking for you, and I won't stop fighting until I find you, okay? You stay strong, and Mommy's right here fighting for you. I love you." Now, this is where the timeline of events starts to get confusing, and that's typically the point in any investigation when you know someone has been lying. Mrs. Sorey told police she had not been able to contact her daughter since they spoke on a video call in April 2019. After that, she said, Montgomery cut off all contact between her and her daughter. But Montgomery claimed to investigators he last saw his daughter around Thanksgiving 2019, claiming that Mrs. Sorey had picked up her from Manchester to take her to live with her. The criminal complaint says that Montgomery claimed to believe his daughter was living with his ex and did not show much emotion or reaction when officers said they were concerned whether Harmony was alive when they contacted him in December. His story was also contradicted by Kayla Montgomery's account, who said she last saw Harmony the day after Thanksgiving, when her husband said he was driving her to see Mrs. Sorey. And in some additional testimony, Adam Montgomery's uncle, Kevin Montgomery, told investigators that he had not seen Harmony or his nephew since late 2019, when she was 5 years old. Police interviews with other family members revealed Montgomery was allegedly abusive toward his daughter, including giving her a black eye, forcing her to clean the toilet with her toothbrush, and making her stand in a corner for hours as punishment. Montgomery's brother Michael Montgomery told investigators he had concerns that Adam was physically abusive to the child and was super short with her. Kevin Montgomery said he noticed Harmony had a black eye in July 2019, which his nephew confessed to causing by hitting her in the face, according to the criminal complaint. I bashed her around this house, he said his nephew told him. Kevin said he contacted DCYF at that time, and he also noticed that his nephew subjected Harmony to other forms of abusive discipline, including scrubbing a toilet with her toothbrush and her being spanked hard on the butt. A neighbor said that it was a bad situation at the property, describing lots of people living there at different times, adults seen arguing in the street, junk left piled up in the yard, and the electricity is switched off at one point. The electricity was turned off and they ran the generator all summer with the wiring running through the window. The neighbor said the Montgomerys were basically squatting at the home when it had fallen into foreclosure, and Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery were refusing to leave. We didn't intermingle with them as it was a bad situation, she said. There were lots of different people living there, piles of junk in the driveway, junk outside. She said she went away for the Thanksgiving holidays in 2019 and returned to find the family had finally packed up and moved out. And another neighbor on the street where Harmony lived also says that the family moved on Thanksgiving 2019. The same time, Adam Montgomery says he last saw the missing child. Manchester police said definitively that Harmony has not been seen since around October or November 2019, when she was 5 years old. Yet, a missing persons investigation was only launched in December 2021. Mrs. Sorey has gone on public record to state that her daughter was failed by everybody. Despite multiple efforts to reach out to her daughter, or at least find out more, no authorities concerned paid attention. And the girl's father clearly couldn't care less what happened to the child. The last confirmed sighting of Harmony by law enforcement was on the 11th of September 2019, when Manchester police officers were called to the home on 77 Guildford Street in Manchester, where she lived. Police Chief Aldenburg, who is in charge of the case now, previously said the last police call-up to the property was in October 2019, but confirmed he had muddled the dates in a press briefing on the 12th of January. Despite the date change, the police chief said investigators are still working on the belief that Harmony was last seen in October or November of that year. Harmony's father and his wife were both arrested and charged on counts related to the missing child in early January. Adam Montgomery was arrested on the 4th of January and charged with second-degree felony assault, 2 misdemeanor counts of endangering the welfare of a child, and 1 misdemeanor count of interference with custody. On the assault charge, he is accused of striking Harmony in the face sometime in July 2019, giving her a black eye according to the criminal complaint. Officials said Montgomery is not cooperating with the investigation into his daughter's disappearance, and he has refused to say where she is. The day after her husband's arrest, Kayla Montgomery was also arrested on 1 felony charge of welfare fraud for allegedly fraudulently collecting welfare benefits for the missing children between December 2019 and June 2021. Mrs. Montgomery, who has 3 children with her husband, is accused of obtaining $1,500 in food stamp benefits meant for Harmony between December 2019 and June 2021, even though the girl was not living with them. Prosecutors have now dropped that welfare fraud charge and added 3 new charges, 1 count of theft by deception and 2 misdemeanor charges of welfare fraud. The charges accuse Mrs. Montgomery of making intentionally false statements about her stepdaughter's whereabouts in February and March 2021 to claim benefits. After the police investigation into the case amped up, several disturbing details about Harmony's father came to light. Adam Montgomery has a history of violence and a long criminal record, including convictions for shooting a man in the head in a drug deal just 6 months before Harmony was born. He was also convicted in 2010 for attacking 2 women at gunpoint. It has emerged that Montgomery is a suspect in the cold case murder of a 28-year-old man in Lynn, New Hampshire, back in February 2008. Darlin Guzman was found shot in the chest in the parking lot of the former White Hen convenience store in Lynn's Austin Square on the night of the 10th of February 2008. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. A source in Boston law enforcement told reporters that Montgomery, who was 18 at the time, and 2 members of his family, who were not named, had been the focus of the murder investigation since day 1. The 3 family members had been in contact with the victim earlier that day and planned to meet with him at the convenience store before the meeting culminated in gunfire, according to the source. The victim's car was later found abandoned in the direction of Bedford, New Hampshire, where Montgomery lived at the time. No one has ever been charged with Mr. Guzman's murder, but the source said Montgomery remains the focus of the investigation to this day. Almost 14 years on from that killing, Adam Montgomery and his wife are now charged on counts related to his missing daughter. However, while charged with serious offenses including child abuse and welfare fraud, no charges have been brought against anyone directly in connection to Harmony's disappearance. So why was Harmony not reported missing for 2 years? Mrs. Sorey has accused the authorities of failing her daughter. She said she made multiple attempts to report concerns to child services. After November 18th, when she contacted Manchester police saying she believed her daughter was missing, someone finally paid attention. Police officers contacted the New Hampshire Division for Children, Youth, and Families, or DCYF, about the location of the missing child. Then, on the 27th of December, the DCYF reported that it was also unable to locate Harmony. Manchester police announced a search was launched on the 31st of December. Emails sent by Mrs. Sorey to the Manchester mayor's office, begging for help in finding her daughter, have also now come out. "Please, I'm begging for help in finding my daughter," she wrote on the 29th of December. In her emails, Mrs. Sorey said Adam Montgomery had never enrolled their daughter in school and that she has missed important doctor's appointments she's had since a baby due to a disability in her eye. The emails were sent just 2 days before police finally reported Harmony missing. As well as the repeated attempts to raise the alarm, the family was well known to child services. Newly released records released on the 12th of January have emerged showing that police officers were called to the Guilford Street home at least 10 times between February 2019, when Montgomery got custody of Harmony, and when she was last seen in the fall. Reports ranged from claims of domestic disturbances to animal welfare and concerns about the living conditions in the home. The DCYF was notified about some of the incidents. New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu announced on the 12th of January that the DCYF is carrying out an internal review of its handling of Harmony's case. However, the governor defended the state's work, saying, "As soon as we found out that this child may not have been showing up for school for quite some time, it was reported up to us. The team got right on it. It wasn't a delay. It didn't sit in a file on somebody's desk." An independent investigation is also being carried out by the Massachusetts Office of the Child Advocate after Harmony was moved from Massachusetts into the custody of her father in New Hampshire in February 2019. Now officials in New Hampshire and Massachusetts are passing the blame between each other. The New Hampshire governor sent a letter to Massachusetts court officials slamming a judge for placing Harmony in the care of her monster father, giving his violent past and long rap sheet. Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker responded to the criticism by saying he felt his pain, but said he wants to wait and see the results of the independent review by the Massachusetts Office of the Child Advocate. Investigators have revealed very few details about what they think may have happened to Harmony. The Guilford Street property has been the focus of much of the search, with investigators seen in the home and the backyard for multiple days. However, Manchester police said the search had concluded there. It is not clear if anything of interest was uncovered, and no other locations for searches have been identified. Chief Aldenburg insisted on the 12th of January, but they are still working on the belief that Harmony is alive. However, he admitted that he was a little discouraged by the case so far and pleaded with the public to come forward with information. He added, "Somebody out there knows something." Despite the national attention and the painstaking efforts to find the missing child, investigators appear to have made very little headway. Though concerning, the lack of progress is perhaps unsurprising, as whoever has information about what happened to the little girl has had a more than a 2-year head start on the investigators. On the 14th of June 2022, law enforcement officials were seen transporting a refrigerator and taking potential pieces of evidence from the scene at a Manchester home where Harmony Montgomery's father and stepmother, Adam and Kayla, once lived. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer stated that bringing in the refrigerator is usually used to maintain biological evidence. If they found a body or body parts in a freeze, law enforcement would want to maintain the level of decomposition, Coffindaffer said. "I have a really creepy feeling about this. It's not good." Several law enforcement agencies were seen outside the Union Street apartment complex, where investigators were focused on the second-floor unit, where Montgomery's father, Adam Montgomery, and his now estranged wife, Caleb, once lived. A woman called Darcy Hambleton, who lives behind the apartment complex, told a reporter that she briefly saw police enter the building on Monday, and it seemed casual. But by 9 a.m. Tuesday, Hambleton said she saw a full-scale investigation from her balcony, which included 6 to 7 officers behind the building at any given time. She added that she saw an individual in an FBI t-shirt and one man in a hazmat suit, and noted that the front of the complex is a media circus. Investigators were later seen taking a refrigerator wrapped in biohazard tape from the apartment and loading it into a truck. A camera was also used to search the sewer in front of the building. "I knew about the case since 2021 when Harmony was initially reported missing. It's all over Manchester on signs and billboards," Hambleton said. "But I had no idea that her father had lived behind me." Noting that she has a 7-year-old daughter herself, Hambleton added that "her heart is in my stomach right now, thinking that something could have happened to that little girl here." After this raid, Crystal Sorey stated publicly, "I know in my heart this is no longer a rescue mission. They're looking for a body." In a disturbing follow-up, Kelsey Small, one-time girlfriend of the father of missing Harmony Montgomery, was recently found dead in Manchester, police said. Small, 27, was with Adam Montgomery when police found the homeless couple sleeping in a car on December 31, 2021, in the early days of the search for Harmony. The cause of death is still pending, but it does not appear suspicious, said police spokeswoman Heather Hamill. According to court records, police were on their 4th day of searching for Harmony when they found Adam Montgomery and Small sleeping in a car on New Year's Eve. The car was parked on Harvell Street on the west side, close to the Gifford Street home where the Montgomery family had lived 2 years earlier. Small told police she had been romantically involved with Adam Montgomery for more than a year. She knew he had 4 children from previous relationships, but he was not in touch with any of them and never talked about Harmony, she told police. She had no idea where Harmony might be. Police eventually arrested Adam Montgomery, but never charged Small with any crime. So what happened to Harmony Montgomery? And where is she now? If her father is innocent, why did he never report her disappearance? And when her mother, Crystal, tried to find her daughter, why weren't police and the local child protective services on her side? As this case unfolds, we hope that Harmony's mother finds the justice she deserves, whether her daughter is dead or living. Police have stated that Harmony is 8 and she should be wearing glasses due to her blindness in one eye. It's a heartbreaking story, and we hope with everything we've got that somehow, against all odds, Harmony Montgomery might still be found alive. In June of 1995, it seemed like life couldn't possibly get any better for Mark and Donna Winger. The nuclear technician and his wife had been happily married for several years, and they had just adopted a newborn baby girl named Bailey. Donna was the oldest of three sisters in what they described as an incredibly close-knit family. The Dreschers grew to love Mark too. He was smart, Jewish. He was attractive and he was fun, Donna's sister, Jenny Levin, told the media. Donna just felt like she had found her person. After Mark and Donna Winger were married in 1989, he was offered a job, and the newlyweds settled in Springfield, Illinois. We always joked about the fact when one sister marries, that husband marries three sisters, Levin said. We shared our lives with Mark. Donna was working as an operating room technician and Mark was a nuclear engineer. Donna couldn't have been happier. The only thing she would have liked to was to have a child, her stepfather, Ira Drescher, said. Donna's mother, Sarah Jane Drescher, said her daughter was overwhelmed when she learned that she could not get pregnant. But then one day while working at the hospital, a doctor told Donna that a teenager was looking to put her baby up for adoption. Adopting the child was an easy decision for her. She looked at me with tears when she said, "Michelle, I knew it the minute they put the baby into my arms. She has always been mine," Donna's sister Michelle Hansen said. The Wingers welcomed baby Bailey into their home on June 1st, 1995. Donna's family said the couple loved their new roles as parents. They seemed to have all the makings of a long and happy life together. Mark was just as excited to become a dad as Donna was to become a mom, Hansen said. Donna had met the woman who would eventually become her best friend, Deanne Schultz, at the hospital, and with the arrival of Bailey, the two bonded over motherhood. But then everything turned dark. In August 1995, Donna took baby Bailey on a trip to Hollywood, Florida, to visit Donna's family. Her mother had just dropped the two of them off at the airport and hired a driver to pick them up in St. Louis, Missouri, and drive them back to Springfield. So after the visit, the two flew into St. Louis Airport and hopped in a cab driven by Roger Harrington for the 2-hour ride back to Springfield. During the course of the drive, Harrington reportedly began flirting with Donna and talking about drugs and orgies. Detective Charlie Cox, a police officer who investigated Donna's death, later said, "This gentleman started opening up to Donna about issues he was having. He had a voice in his head named Dom. Dom would tell him to do bad things. Recently, Dom was telling him to hurt people." After Donna safely arrived home with Bailey, she called the transit company to make a formal complaint about Harrington's behavior, and the driver was suspended. Cox later said that the driver started flirting with Donna, telling her he liked older women and even invited her to attend what he described as one of his sex parties. Donna had told her family that the ride was terrifying because he was driving erratically at 75 miles per hour. After the harrowing ride, Donna had been the victim of some strange phone calls, Weinhoft said. The family had believed that the driver had been stalking her and was a danger. Donna called the limousine company to file a complaint and Harrington was suspended. Mark argued his wife to write down the story in case they might need it. Police later found the note describing Donna's harrowing ride in her handwriting at the crime scene. Donna also told Mark about the experience, and though he played a part of the supportive husband and helped her file the complaint, it turned out that he had ulterior motives for doing so. Just days later, Mark invited Harrington to their home, perhaps under the pretense of helping him get his job back. On the 29th of August 1995, the cab driver wrote Mark's name, address, and the time on a scrap of paper in his car, drove to the Wingers' home, walked inside with a coffee cup and a pack of cigarettes, and was shot twice in the head. Mark Winger then called 911 and told the dispatcher he'd just shot a man who was killing his wife. He informed police that he'd been walking on the treadmill in the basement when he heard a commotion upstairs. He grabbed his gun, went to investigate, and found Harrington swinging a hammer at Donna. In an effort to defend his wife, he'd shot the man twice. Police arrived on the scene to find that both Donna and Harrington still had a weak pulse. Mark was in a back bedroom, rolling back and forth in total shock. When former Springfield police detective Charlie Cox arrived at the Wingers' home, he remembered they could see the victims from the front door. Donna was clinging to life, said Sangamon County Assistant State Attorney Steve Weinhold. She had been hit no less than 7 times in the head with a hammer. The second victim, a white man, had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, but still had a pulse when police arrived, said Weinhoft. It was quite chaotic, Cox said. I knew that they were probably going to be transporting the victim soon, so I wanted to try and get identification on the male suspect. Cox found the man's wallet and was able to identify him as Roger Harrington. Police recovered a bloody hammer near the 2 bodies and found Mark's .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun, a yellow mug, and a pack of cigarettes on the same dining table. They also noticed that Harrington's car had been parked against traffic, facing the wrong direction. At the crime scene, Cox said Mark was very upset and very emotional, and that he repeatedly asked who the man he'd killed was. Cox avoided identifying Harrington and tried to calm Mark down. As police combed through the scene, Mark asked police if the intruder's name was Roger. Cox confirmed that it was. Mark was shocked and he said, "Oh my gosh, that's the man who's been harassing my wife this week," Cox said. Cox, who was familiar with Harrington after he'd lived in a trailer park owned by Cox, believed Harrington might have snapped. "I knew him as a very volatile type subject. He and his wife rented a trailer for me," Cox said. "Knowing what I knew about Mr. Harrington in the past, how quick he was to anger, I thought that very well he could have gone over there to try to get his job back. There's a hammer laying right there on the table. He picks it up and goes into a rage, then the husband shoots the bad guy." Tragically, both victims succumbed to their injuries. After learning about Donna's previous run-in with Harrington and listening to Mark's version of events, the police closed the case within days, listing Roger Harrington as the culprit. Because once police examined the scene and listened to Mark's story, detectives concluded that he had acted in self-defense. The case was closed in about 48 hours, Weinhoft said. But Harrington's family insisted from the beginning that their son was harmless. "He was no troublemaker. He was a good kid. He wouldn't even strike at anybody," his mother, Helen Harrington, said. "I don't think he would hurt anybody, and I don't think he was crazy." So it seemed like Mark Winger was going to get away with murder. Donna's mother spoke to the media about the evening, and the family received the news of her daughter's murder. "It was 4 in the morning, and I said, 'Jenny, it's Mom. Something terrible has happened,' Sarah Jane Drescher said of her call to Levin. "We sat there in my room, just crying at this unimaginable loss," Levin said. In the following months, Donna's mother and sister took turns traveling to Illinois to help take care of Bailey. "I loved Mark because he loved Donna, and that's what was important to me," Sarah Jane Drescher said. "But I had to be very careful because I did not want to ruin my relationship with him, because I did not want to ruin my relationship with the baby. I wanted to be a grandma, and Bailey made me a grandma." Mark was now a single father raising his infant daughter on his own. Donna's family initially flew to Illinois to help out, but they couldn't stay, and they suggested Mark hire a nanny. In January 1996, he met 23-year-old Rebecca Simic, who was searching for a nanny job in the area. Rebecca told reporters, "It just felt like Bailey was the one that really needed me the most. She had been through so much already at the age of 3 months." Rebecca was wonderful with Bailey, and even Donna's family agreed that she was like an angel sent to help Mark. While she felt a little uncomfortable in the house, where 2 people had died violently, she was dedicated to giving Bailey a good childhood despite the trauma of losing her mother. "I didn't want to like Rebecca, but it was hard not to like her," Levin said. "Seeing her with Bailey, there was really nothing bad we could say about her." Meanwhile, Rebecca's role at Mark's home had begun to evolve. When you live with someone and you're taking care of a child together, it's very easy to kind of play house. Rebecca said later on. Rebecca told the media that she was blown away by what the infant had been through in such a short time. "Mark made me feel like I was like an angel sent to him from God or Donna, and it was my purpose to make this family whole again," Rebecca said. She lost 2 mothers by the time she was 3 months old, and she was so smiley, Rebecca said. "I wanted to get in there and say, I'm going to help and I'm going to make this little girl's life better." Mark helped Rebecca feel at ease in her new role. After a few months, the two found themselves sharing conversation and a glass of wine at the end of a long day. And then one thing led to another as their relationship turned intimate. Within the year, Rebecca was pregnant with Mark's child. The couple eloped in Hawaii in October 1996, just 14 months after Donna's death. "I remember asking him how he could move on so quickly," Rebecca later recalled. "And he explained to me that when you have a good marriage, it's natural for you to just want that again." Rebecca said Mark had told her he wasn't able to have children, So she said she was very surprised when she found out she was pregnant with his child only months after moving in. Obviously, I wasn't careful. It was just kind of a shock, she said. Mark, on the other hand, was thrilled, Rebecca recalled. It felt like it was a victory to him, she said. Mark put pressure on me to marry him and have children with him. Rebecca said that Mark, who was Jewish when they met, even started going to church with her. She said he told her they could raise a family in a Christian home. I would be honored to be your husband and blessed if you were my wife, Mark wrote in a letter to Rebecca. Mark's rabbi, Michael Datz, asked him about his change in faith, and he said that Mark explained, Judaism is just too difficult and unforgiving. Rabbi Datz didn't understand, asking, Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you need forgiveness for? He said Mark didn't respond. But then it seemed like Mark was trying almost a little too hard to leave the past behind. 16 months after his wife's death, Mark told Sarah Jane Drescher that he was going to sell the house where her daughter Donna had died and buy another one just outside of town. He and Rebecca had started a family of their own, and he started cutting ties with Donna's parents. I received a letter from Mark one day saying to me I could not be called Grandma, Sarah Jane Drescher said. I wrote him back and I begged him, please let her call me Grandma. And he said, I'm sorry, there's no way I am going to allow her to call you Grandma, and that's the way it is. Sarah said she mourned that loss for a long time. Bailey Simic, now 25, told reporters that her grandmother and grandfather, Ira Drescher, would send a birthday card to her every year. I always remember asking my mom, who's Sarah Jane and Ira, she said. My mom would always explain, like, those are Donna's parents, and they just want to let you know that, like, they love you and that they remember you. Eventually, Mark sold the house where Donna had died and moved with his new wife to the suburbs outside of Springfield. Things seemed great on the surface. They had 3 children together, and Rebecca raised Bailey as her daughter. Though chaotic, their life seemed almost perfect. Mark was a loving partner and a very involved father. That would all change quite soon. One day in early 1909, when Mark was feeling ill, Rebecca took him to the emergency room in the hospital where Donna had worked before her death. There they saw Donna's best friend and co-worker, Deanne Schultz. She seemed upset to see Mark, and Rebecca remembered that Deanne had acted strangely when she first came on Bailey's nanny, as if she were anxious to stay involved in Bailey's life. After they returned home, Mark commented that that may not be the last they heard from Deanne. He was right. In February 1999, Deanne dropped a bombshell on the police, revealing that she and Mark had been having an affair before Donna's death. She said that, at one point, he'd remarked to her that things would be easier for them if Donna was dead. She told them that after Donna's fateful ride with Roger Harrington, Mark said that he needed to get that driver to the house. All you'd need to do is find the body, he told her. Deanne never thought Mark was serious, but when Donna turned up dead soon after, she knew he had done it. Mark had threatened her not to tell anyone about the things he'd said, and she'd attempted suicide several times while struggling with her guilt. After seeing him in the hospital, she decided she couldn't keep quiet any longer. After hearing Deanne's story, police decided to take a closer look at the evidence from the day of the murders. The more they thought about what they'd once assumed was an open and shut case, the more questions they had. Why were there no signs of forced entry into the Winger home that August day? Why would Roger Harrington bring his cup of coffee and cigarettes into the house with him if he'd planned to attack Donna? And why would he use the Winger's hammer as a weapon when he had a tire iron and a knife in his car? At that point, investigators came upon 3 never-before-seen Polaroid photos taken the day of the murders. They'd been with the evidence collected in a civil suit Mark had filed against the transportation company that had employed Harrington. The position of the bodies in the photos showed that Mark's version of events were not possible. Mark Winger had stated that Roger Harrington was kneeling right next to Donna Winger's head, and he was beating her with a hammer, Weinhoft explained. He stated that he shot him and that the man fell backward so that his feet remained near Donna's head. In reality, the Polaroid photographs show the exact opposite. Blood spatter experts agreed. Cox later told the media, I was ashamed of the way the investigation went. I heard Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim. It had become clear that Mark was the real murderer behind the scenes the whole time. Rebecca Simic was left to make sense of the tragedy. She had no idea what Mark was capable of, and afterward, She moved her 4 children out of Springfield to feel safer. While Mark had tried to keep Bailey away from Donna's family, Rebecca encouraged them to be reunited. "We'd been hurt a lot by the same person," Rebecca said, "but it didn't break us." Donna's family and Rebecca spoke to reporters about the horrific realization that Mark was a manipulative killer hiding behind the mask of a brilliant engineer and a kind, loving husband and father. In December 1999, more than 4 years after the murders, the Springfield State Journal-Register ran an article based on allegations in the civil lawsuit that Mark had arranged the murder himself and killed both his wife and Harrington. The allegations were based on a blood spatter expert hired by Bark Transportation in the case after the arrest of their employee Harrington. "Everything came to a head. It changed everything," Rebecca said of the article. "I mean, it went from Mark as the hero who was defending his wife, this noble stand-up guy that every man wanted to pat on the back, to a manipulative, deviant murderer." As the detectives continued their reinvestigation, they learned that Harrington's roommate, Susan Collins, had initially told police that someone asked to meet with Harrington on the day of the murders, and that she had seen Harrington on the phone arranging that meeting. Inside Harrington's car, they found a note written on a bank deposit slip with Mark's name, his address, and the time to be there. Roger Harrington was not an intruder, but rather he was lured into that home by Mark Winger, Weinhoft said. Deanne Schultz's cooperation with police and evidence that raised questions about Mark's story prompted the voluntary dismissal of the civil suit against Bark Transportation. "I didn't see it coming," Rebecca said. "I didn't know that this whole investigation was brewing. I never thought the whole time that they thought my husband was a diabolical murderer." A warrant was issued for Mark's arrest, and he was taken into custody while at work. "I had made plans to go to McDonald's Playland," Rebecca recalled. "We were there and I got a phone call, and it was Mark's secretary, and she told me that Mark had just been arrested. I was just sick. Like my whole body kind of went numb, and I just couldn't believe it. I was shaking so badly, and I just remembered feeling so scared. I felt that I owed it to him and to my kids to just stand by him," she said. Hanson, Donna's sister, said she didn't feel relieved following Mark's arrest. "I still wanted to believe he was innocent," she said. "Here's this person that I know in handcuffs, and what's going to happen?" Bailey was just 6 years old at the time of Mark's arrest. She said no longer having her father home was scary. "I just remember everyone just trying to remain calm and kind of, at the time, being like, Dad's just going away for a while and that he'll be back soon," she said. But that was no longer possible. On August 23, 2001, Mark Winger was indicted for the murders of Donna Winger and Roger Harrington. At the trial in May 2002, a visibly shaky Deanne testified against Mark. The court granted her immunity in exchange for her testimony, though there was no evidence linking her to anything other than keeping Mark's terrible secret. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. One of the key points the prosecution had to prove was that Harrington had gone to the house to meet with the Wingers, not to commit a murder. They presented the cigarettes and coffee mug that he'd brought inside, as well as the weapons he'd left in his car and the note with Mark's name and address. Mark's attorney argued that Harrington was mentally ill, that he behaved erratically, and that these traits indicated he was capable of murder. When prosecutors presented the Polaroid showing the position of the bodies before they were removed from the scene, Mark's attorney argued throughout the trial that first responders could have moved the bodies. "It's our belief that Roger comes to the house, he's allowed into the home," now retired Detective Jim Graham said. "There were no signs of forced entry, and he was executed at that time." Hearing the gunshot, Donna Winger then comes from the bathroom to investigate. He then beats his wife to death with a hammer. Mark then calls 911. In the 911 call, someone can be heard moaning in the background when Mark tells the operator he can hear his baby crying and hangs up. He had told the operator there was a bullet in Harrington's head, but when police arrived, Harrington had been shot twice. Deanne also gave damning testimony at the trial, saying that Mark told her it would be easier if Donna just died. "I thought it was crazy talk," she said during her cross-examination. After a chance meeting years later, Deanne testified that she confronted Mark in the hopes of gathering information and asked him how he lived with himself, and that he'd replied that he had found Jesus Christ and was forgiven. She said he warned her that if she ever said anything, they would both be in trouble. "I didn't think that anybody would believe her," Rebecca said. "I just thought if Mark truly did that, she would have come forward right away." Mark's defense argued that Deanne was emotionally unstable and just a woman who had been scorned. Deanne Schultz's testimony was able to demonstrate that, in reality, Mark was obviously unhappy, unfaithful, and had specifically talked about wanting to kill his wife, Weinhoft said. Schultz was granted immunity for her testimony, he added. There was no direct evidence that directly linked Deanne to actively participating in this crime. In the end, she was such a valuable witness as it relates to presenting the motive. After a trial that lasted 3 weeks, the jury found Mark Winger guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Rebecca said she believed he would be going home with them. After the verdict, she said the words "guilty" rang through her head and that she wanted the earth to open up and swallow me. Sarah Jane Drescher and her daughters, Donna's sisters, were with her when they heard the verdict. "The 3 of us just embraced and cried," she said. And the story gets even more twisted, because 4 years later, Mark was also sentenced to an additional 35 years in prison when he tried to hire a hitman to kill Deanne, or testifying against him. He even attempted to put out a hit against a childhood friend who had refused to pay his bail. Helen Harrington was relieved and grateful that her son had been vindicated of Donna's murder. "We knew that Roger was innocent, and it finally got proven," she said. "He was branded a murderer at the time, but then all this came to an end." The police also had to come to terms with the faulty initial investigation. "I was ashamed of the way the investigation went," Cox said. "I hurt Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim." The police department had too hastily closed the case and turned a blind eye to some red flags, and to right such a wrong, it felt great, Bram added. But Rebecca said there wasn't any closure for her or her family. "When we lose someone, we gather. We have a funeral," Rebecca shared. "But when someone goes to prison, well, what do? You're just kind of left with this emptiness and this hole that you can't really have closure with that." "It wasn't just him being sentenced to life," she said. "We were sentenced to a life of a father in prison." Bailey Simic says she missed having her father around while growing up. "It was really hard being in school, seeing all the other kids have their dads and that relationship," she said. "And now suddenly, I couldn't just go to my dad's room or have him pick us up from school or anything like that." Ben Simic was only a year old when his dad went to prison. "I can look at the pictures and look at myself and say, that kid has no idea. He was way too young to know anything that was going on," he said. Rebecca had to move out of Springfield with her kids, and the home that she'd bought with Mark was foreclosed. She had been a stay-at-home mom for 7 years, so she had no option but to file for bankruptcy. "I didn't have anything to give my kids. Everything had been taken away. All I had was love," she said. Rebecca never remarried as far as we know. She raised all 4 of the children on her own. And Bailey has since reunited with Donna's family. "It was so incredible to see that there's this whole big family that loves me. And Sarah Jane still has my baby picture on her kitchen counter with all of her other grandkids, even though we've been gone for so long," she said. "We've been hurt a lot by the same person, but it didn't break us," Rebecca said. Although Sarah Jane Drescher says there will never be closure for the murder of her daughter, the family has worked together to set up Donna's Fund, which is a part of Women in Distress, an organization that works to provide shelter for women trying to escape abuse. "I think her legacy will live on through people that we help," Levin said, "and through the beautiful memories that we have of her." So what do you think of this crazy, twisted case of murder uncovered? Would Mark Winger still be walking scot-free today if his former lover, Deanne Schultz, hadn't developed a guilty conscience? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And don't forget to like, share, and hit the subscribe for more in-depth coverage of some of the most manipulative murders of all time.